Humanity's relationship with the unseen began long before written words, long before cities, long before the idea of history existed. In the earliest moments of human awareness, when individuals first opened their eyes to a world filled with storms, darkness, fire, and inexplicable forces, they also opened their minds to the possibility that something greater watched back. The wind that howled across the plains seemed to speak in tones that were both warning and promise, and the stars above looked like countless eyes fixed upon the fragile figures gathered around ancient fires. In those moments, fear and wonder intertwined, shaping the first instinctive belief that the world carried hidden messages waiting to be understood. Long before structured religions or organized societies, early humans lived with a profound sensitivity to patterns. Every shift in weather, every strange mark on the ground, every cry of an animal could alter survival. Observing these details was not a luxury, but a necessity. Over time, the boundaries between practical interpretation and mystical meaning blurred so completely that it became impossible to separate one from the other. A gust of wind that arrived moments before a predator attack, or an unusual movement in the sky before a hunt, felt too meaningful to be coincidence. As these moments repeated across generations, people began to believe that the world communicated through symbols, and that these symbols were deliberate. The sky was not simply a canopy of light, but a living narrative. The earth was not merely soil beneath the feet, but a surface inscribed with messages from forces that shaped destiny. Early humans did not possess the scientific vocabulary to describe patterns, probabilities, or natural laws, so they filled the gaps with imagination woven through the thread of necessity. Their interpretations became the earliest forms of divinatory thinking, quiet attempts to decode a universe that felt alive. The first humans stared into the night sky for reasons that were both practical and emotional. They used the stars to orient themselves, to measure seasons, and to predict weather patterns. Yet, as they watched those lights slowly shift across the heavens, they sensed something deeper. The stars seemed purposeful in their movement, dancing in patterns too graceful to be accidents. The moon's waxing and waning carried a rhythm that felt like breathing. The sun's return after a long winter seemed like a promise kept. These observations were not simply data. They were the earliest seeds of a relationship with the cosmos. In small clusters of early societies, storytellers emerged. These individuals possessed a heightened sensitivity to patterns, a stronger imagination, or an ability to express visions so vividly that others could not help but believe them. They watched the flickering shadows on cave walls, listened to the crackle of fire, and found a meaning in the traces of ash or the motion of smoke. Their minds created narratives that allowed their communities to make sense of unexplained events. Over time, these storytellers became intermediaries between the human world and the unseen world, giving rise to the earliest shamans and seers. Early shamans did not separate the physical world from the spiritual. For them, every sound in the forest was a whisper from the spirits. Every strange dream carried instructions from beyond. The shapes formed by clouds were messages in motion. When they entered trance states through rhythmic drumming, dancing, or natural substances, their visions felt more authoritative than ordinary perception. They believed themselves to be navigating a realm where time folded and the souls of ancestors hovered just beyond reach. Hare communities believed them too, because these altered states often produced insights that seemed impossible through everyday reasoning. These trance experiences were powerful because they often aligned with intuition, sharpened by years of observing nature. A shaman might sense an approaching migration pattern of animals not through supernatural sight, but through a subtle shift in the environment. Yet, when interpreted through the lens of vision and spirit, these insights became divine messages. This merging of instinct with imagination created the foundation of divination, a bridge between the internal world of perception and the external world of signs. As humans migrated across continents, carrying stories in their minds rather than written words, They continued to refine the art of seeing meaning where others saw chaos. A crack in a bone left by fire was not random. It became a pathway to foresight. The flight of birds was not a coincidence. It became a forecast of fortune or danger. Divination did not emerge as a rigid discipline all at once. It evolved organically as people attempted to understand life's unpredictable nature by detecting patterns woven through both the physical and the spiritual. Life in the prehistoric world was filled with uncertainty. Food sources could disappear. Harsh winters could destroy entire groups. Illness could sweep through without warning. In such an environment, individuals who claimed to interpret signs from the unseen held immense value. Their guidance could tilt the balance between despair and hope. The shaman believed a hunt would succeed because of a dream involving an animal spirit. The hunters moved forward with renewed conviction. Belief became fuel for action, and action often shaped outcomes. The earliest people also believed that ancestors continued to influence the living after death. Gravesites were not merely places to bury bodies, but portals where communication flowed between worlds. Offerings placed beside bones were not symbolic gestures. They were attempts to maintain harmony with spirits who could offer protection or punishment. When wind stirred the tall grasses around burial mounds, people imagined voices of the departed calling out. These sensory experiences strengthened the idea that the dead could send signs, warnings, or blessings. At night, when darkness expanded across the land and silence wrapped around small communities, dreams became powerful sources of insight. Before the rise of writing, a dream could be one of the few ways a message seemed to travel from the unseen realm to the conscious mind. People believed dreams to be journeys during which the soul left the body and interacted with forces that shaped destiny. This belief was so widespread that even distant cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, independently developed similar ideas about dream travel. Such shared perspectives reveal how deeply rooted the longing for divinatory understanding was. Divination was not merely a spiritual activity, it was a psychological anchor. When the world felt unpredictable, divination offered a sense of structure. When tragedies occurred, divination allowed people to search for meaning instead of collapsing under randomness. When success arrived, divination provided a narrative that connected achievements to cosmic approval. This emotional function of divination shaped the way humans viewed themselves within the world. Even simple patterns, such as the way a branch broke or the way animals behaved before a storm, gathered symbolic significance over generations. The mind naturally sought connection, and the heart naturally sought reassurance. Divination grew from these human needs, not as superstition, but as early attempts to form a coherent worldview. Every omen that appeared in the natural world became both a mystery and a guide. People believed they could read the language of the universe if they sharpened their awareness enough. Communities soon developed rituals designed to help individuals enter states of heightened perception. These rituals involved rhythmic repetition, such as chanting or drumming, which altered consciousness and allowed the mind to drift into a liminal space between waking and dreaming. In that space, people perceived images and symbols with striking clarity. These inner visions were interpreted as glimpses of hidden truths. The rituals reinforced the belief that seeing beyond the surface of reality was possible for those who practiced discipline, purity, or devotion. Over time, divination intertwined with early notions of morality. If a hunt failed or crops withered, people wondered whether they had offended a spirit or ignored an omen. Divination helped them identify what actions needed correction. It created a feedback loop between behavior and outcome, embedding ethics into the fabric of spiritual understanding. This integration of foresight and moral consequence shaped early societies by encouraging communal harmony and respect for traditions. The earliest tools of divination were simple objects that carried symbolic weight. Bones, stones, shells, and sticks became channels through which meaning flowed. When held by a shaman, these objects felt alive with energy. When thrown onto the ground, their arrangements appeared as coded messages from the universe. People believed that the pattern created in that moment did not arise by chance, but through the will of unseen forces guiding the objects. This practice laid the groundwork for later divinatory systems that relied on casting lots, reading runes, or interpreting the spread of cards. Fire was another central medium for early divination. Flames flickered in unpredictable patterns that seemed to reflect emotions or intentions of the spirits. Sparks that jumped upward were interpreted as signs of approval, while flames that sank low were seen as warnings. The crackling of burning wood created rhythms that shamans listened to with attentive stillness. The shape of rising smoke twisting in the air was read as a message drifting between worlds. Fire became not only a source of warmth and protection, but also a sacred mirror in which the unseen revealed fragments of its design. As communities grew larger, divination expanded from intimate guidance to communal decision-making. Its leaders relied on omens before embarking on long migrations. Families consulted seers before forming alliances or choosing locations for shelter. Collective belief amplified the power of divination, giving seers influence that extended beyond spiritual matters. Decisions, guided by divinatory interpretation, shaped the movement of tribes, the structure of communities, and the direction of cultural evolution. The growing complexity of human life encouraged greater refinement in the art of interpreting signs. Seasons became cycles. Cycles became calendars. Calendars created a sense of cosmic order. With each layer of understanding, divination became more structured. Some signs were associated with prosperity, others with danger, others with transformation. Over time, these associations solidified into traditions passed down through generations. What began as instinct gradually became inherited knowledge. The desire to communicate with forces beyond the visible world also encouraged early artistic expression. Cave paintings depicting animals, spirits, or visions were not merely decorative. They were part of ritual landscapes intended to interact with the unseen realm. The act of painting was itself a form of invocation. The symbols painted on stone walls may have served as visual guides for shamans entering trance states, or as symbolic messages left for ancestral spirits. The line between art and divination was fluid because both attempted to reveal truths beyond surface reality. Its communities became more stable. Knowledge accumulated. Observations once made by individual shamans were recorded in memory and reinforced through storytelling. Over time, this accumulation transformed divination into something resembling a proto-science of meaning. People realized that certain signs often preceded specific outcomes. Patterns repeated, causes and effects emerged. Although interpretations were framed in spiritual language, they reflected a growing sophistication in observation and inference. Divination became a blend of intuition, tradition, and early empirical thinking. The first voyages across rivers and plains were guided not only by maps drawn in the mind, but also by the reading of signs. Travelers observed the behavior of animals, the color of the sky, the direction of the wind, and the presence of certain plants. These observations helped them avoid danger and find resources. But they did not see this knowledge as separated from the divine. They believed nature revealed its secrets to those who listened carefully, and that listening itself was an act of devotion. Through millennia, divination became a shared human language, long before spoken languages diverged. Regardless of geography, people everywhere looked upward to the sky, outward to the horizon, inward to their dreams, and downward to the symbols etched into the earth. This universal impulse bound humanity together in a search for meaning. Even though each culture developed unique methods, the core belief was the same. The universe communicated through signs, and those signs could be read. In this early stage of history, the unseen was not a distant realm. It was woven into every moment of life. The world felt enchanted, alive, with intention. Divination emerged as the art of interpreting that intention, of bringing clarity to experiences that otherwise felt overwhelming or mysterious. It answered questions before formal religions existed, and it eased fears before philosophy arose. It provided a way to navigate a world filled with uncertainty, offering both guidance and comfort. The origins of divination reveal as much about the human heart as they do about ancient practices. At its core, divination was an expression of longing for safety, understanding, connection, and reassurance. Early humans sought meaning because they needed it, because meaning transformed fear into purpose and uncertainty into possibility. This emotional foundation shaped everything that came afterward, influencing the evolution of divinatory systems across continents and centuries. Even as life slowly shifted from nomadic existence to settled communities, the impulse to read signs remained strong. People continued to look for patterns in the movement of stars, in the formation of clouds, and the sounds carried by the wind. These observations formed the first threads of organized cosmology, which in turn formed the earliest spiritual frameworks. Divination became a guiding force that touched every aspect of life, shaping decisions, beliefs, and relationships with the natural world. This early period marks the beginning of humanity's oldest conversation, the dialogue between the seen and the unseen. A conversation carried through dreams, through symbols, through intuition, and through the quiet belief that life held secrets waiting to be understood. Divination emerged as the art of listening to that conversation. And the journey that began around ancient fires would continue across thousands of years, evolving into ever more intricate forms. As human groups slowly transitioned from purely nomadic patterns toward more settled forms of life, their understanding of science deepened. The Neolithic world was shaped by new rhythms, including seasonal planting, harvest cycles, animal domestication, and the construction of permanent shelters. These changes did not diminish the presence of the unseen. Instead, they increased the need to read messages woven into the land. People realized that survival depended not only on raw effort, but also on harmonizing their actions with forces that influenced nature's fluctuations. Divination became less of an occasional practice and more of a daily tool for guidance. During this era, the relationship between humans and animals intensified. The domestication of sheep, goats, and cattle meant that people encountered animal behavior constantly. They watched patterns in movement, fertility, health, and death. A sudden illness in a flock could devastate a community. Thus, people began interpreting the smallest deviations in animal behavior as signs from the spirits or the ancestors. A cow that bent its head in a certain direction or cried at an unusual time might indicate a change in weather, fertility, or fortune. As agriculture developed, the earth itself became a source of omens. Communities relied heavily on the success of crops, which were at the mercy of rainfall, sunlight, and soil conditions. Cracks that formed in drying ground could appear as messages carved by invisible hands. The growth pattern of plants was studied with deep seriousness. If stalks bent in a particular direction, or if leaves displayed unusual markings, people believed that these signs foretold events in the coming season. Each shift in nature was imbued with significance, binding divination ever more tightly to daily existence. Fire continued to be a sacred tool for understanding forces beyond human control. In Neolithic communities, hearths were the center of social and ritual life. Flames were believed to carry prayers upward or downward into unseen realms. When individuals stared into the heart of a fire, they sometimes entered a dreamlike state where images formed in the glowing embers. These images were not dismissed as imagination. They were treated as genuine messages, fragments of insight offered by spirits that lived within or around the flames. The dual nature of fire, both life-giving and destructive, reinforced its symbolic power. The first settlements, with designated ritual areas, reveal how deeply divination became integrated into community structure. Archaeological evidence from ancient sites shows deliberate arrangements of stones, bones, and carvings. These placements were not random, okay? They were positioned with orientation to the sun, moon, or landscape features that held symbolic meaning. The idea that certain spaces were sacred meant that information received within these spaces was considered especially potent. A diviner standing at the correct place during the correct season and facing the correct direction was believed to interpret signs with amplified accuracy. People also began shaping materials specifically for divinatory use. Bones were smoothed and carved with symbols. Stones were selected for their shapes or markings. Shells were gathered from distant shores because they were believed to hold the memory of waters far from human habitation. These objects were used in rituals of casting, where their final positions formed patterns that diviners interpreted. The sense that every material held a hidden essence allowed communities to approach the physical world as a living archive of spiritual messages. In this period, spiritual roles became more distinct. Not everyone entered trance states or interpreted signs. Some individuals were chosen because they displayed signs of sensitivity from a young age. A child who experienced intense dreams, spoke with imaginary companions that seemed too vivid, or noticed subtle changes in nature before others did, might be set apart for special training. These children were believed to be touched by spirits or destined to serve as intermediaries. Their upbringing involved learning the symbolic language of their community, memorizing stories, and practicing rituals that regulated their interaction with the unseen. Such children often spent long periods alone in nature. Solitude sharpened their awareness of small details others ignored. They observed the way shadows shifted across rocks, listened to distant bird calls, and felt changes in the air before storms arrived. As teachers encouraged them to focus on sensations that most people dismissed. This training cultivated an inner stillness that allowed them to receive intuitive impressions with clarity. Over time, their minds became attuned to both external signs and internal visions, enabling them to blend perception with imagination in ways that shaped future divinatory traditions. Rituals involving bones became increasingly elaborate. One of the earliest practices involved heating shoulder blades or shells over fire until they cracked. The patterns of fractures were interpreted as messages delivered through the interplay of fire, bone, and spirit. These fractures were believed to form shapes that reflected the intentions of invisible forces. A long straight crack might represent a decisive path forward, while a cluster of circular fractures might indicate obstacles or change. These interpretations varied across regions, but the underlying belief remained that the universe communicated through these patterns. Traces of these practices can still be found in ancient archaeological sites. Burn marks on bones and shells suggest ritual use, and some sites show repeated heating of bones in specific areas. This repetition hints at established rituals performed by specialists rather than random acts. The precision seen in these remains reflects the seriousness with which early people approached divination. It was not a frivolous activity. It was woven into the survival strategy of the entire community, guiding decisions that shaped lives. Dream interpretation also deepened during this era. Communities noticed that certain dreams recurred among individuals facing similar struggles. A hunter who dreamed of falling might face danger on the next hunt. A woman who dreamed of water might experience an emotional or physical transformation. Over generations, symbolic associations developed. These associations became shared knowledge, creating early forms of dream symbolism. When someone experienced a powerful dream, they sought guidance from a diviner who had memorized patterns that connected dreams with outcomes. Ritual sleep was also introduced. Individuals seeking guidance would sleep in sacred areas near fires, springs, or special stones. It was believed that dreams occurring in these locations carried heightened significance. Sometimes, diviners guided individuals into sleep through rhythmic chanting, helping them enter a state where dreams flowed more freely. The messages received during these rituals were treated as divine instructions, shaping choices about travel, relationships, and communal efforts. The development of pottery added a new dimension to divination. Early pots, decorated with lines, spirals, or animal figures, were more than functional items. Their symbols might represent visions received in trance. When liquids were poured into them, the motion of the liquid might reflect spiritual forces at play. When individuals gazed into the surface of water inside a pot, they sometimes saw reflections distorted by flickering firelight. These distortions were interpreted as hints of the unseen world. Water became a mirror for spiritual insight, and pottery became a vessel not only for food, but also for messages. The earliest agricultural temples also suggest that divination had begun taking on communal and ceremonial importance. These structures, with carved pillars and carefully arranged stones, were not merely places of gathering. They were portals where the human world and the unseen world were believed to intersect. Diviners performed rituals at these sites, reading earthly and celestial signs with heightened concentration. The alignment of structures with solstices or equinoxes suggests that communities believed certain celestial events strengthened the flow of divine communication. Stone circles played a role in divination as well. Groups gathered in these large open-air structures to observe the sky. When the moon rose between stones during specific seasons, it signaled the time for planting or harvesting. These observations were not interpreted strictly as astronomical phenomena. They were woven into spiritual narratives about balance, harmony, and cosmic order. This placement of stones allowed diviners to track celestial patterns with remarkable accuracy, reinforcing the belief that the heavens communicated to predictable rhythms. Alongside these advances, the concept of spirit animals emerged as an important part of divinatory practice. People believe that individuals were connected to specific animals whose behavior mirrored their spiritual path. As someone encountered their spirit animal in real life or in dreams, the event carried significance. The behavior of that animal provided clues about the future or insight into personal challenges. This belief deepened the sense of connection between humans and the natural world, strengthening the foundation of divinatory thought. As community structures became more stable, divination gained formal procedures. Seers developed rituals that required specific steps, materials, or chants. These procedures ensured consistency, which increased trust in interpretations. For example, a diviner might begin by purifying themselves with smoke or water before reading signs. They might chant an invocation to invite ancestral spirits. They might cast bones in a particular manner or observe environmental signs at certain times of day. These formalities elevated the practice from personal intuition to communal tradition. Divination also became a way to resolve disputes. When disagreements arose within the community, individuals sometimes accepted the diviner's interpretation as a final decision. This gave diviners a role similar to early judges, though their authority was rooted in spiritual insight rather than legal principle. The belief that spirits influenced their interpretations encouraged acceptance of their judgments. Their ability to ease tensions and restore harmony further solidified their position. Weather became one of the most carefully observed domains. Rain, storms, and seasonal variations had dramatic effects on both agriculture and survival. People noticed subtle indicators that preceded weather changes. The behavior of insects, the color of the sky, the smell of the air, or the shape of clouds suggested what was coming. These observations, combined with symbolic thinking, formed a highly sophisticated system of weather-related divination. Diviners were expected to predict the future, not only in spiritual matters, but also in practical ones. During this period, the idea of fate began taking shape. People sensed that certain events seemed destined, appearing as if written into the fabric of reality. Divination became a way to glimpse fragments of this destiny. However, early humans did not view fate as rigid or absolute. Instead, they believed that signs helped them understand which paths were open to them, allowing them to make choices aligned with cosmic harmony. Divination did not remove agency, it clarified possibilities. The growing complexity of rituals led to the rise of early mythological frameworks. Stories emerged about spirits who controlled storms, animals who carried cosmic wisdom, and ancestors who guarded the living. These stories served both educational and spiritual purposes. They taught individuals how to interpret science and understand the interconnectedness of the world. Mythology gave structure to divinatory thinking, allowing communities to pass knowledge across generations. Shamans, seers, and wise individuals began traveling between communities. These wanderers carried knowledge from one region to another. As they shared rituals and interpretations, ideas blended and evolved. A method used in one valley might be adapted to local beliefs in another. This exchange of ideas contributed to the diversity of divinatory systems that would later emerge in more advanced civilizations. The early world was connected not through written communication, through oral exchange facilitated by these spiritually trained individuals. Gradually, the earliest notions of the soul emerged. People believed that human beings contained a part that could separate from the physical body. This soul was thought to travel in dreams, trance states, or moments of crisis. Its journeys provided insights into the unseen world. Diviners used these beliefs to guide rituals of healing, protection, and transformation. They believed that the soul could receive instructions or warnings during these travels, shaping an individual's path. The transition into the Bronze Age brought new materials and new possibilities. Metals were rare, precious, and difficult to obtain. When people discovered that fire transformed the nature of metal, they viewed the process as magical. Melted bronze that cooled into shapes seemed to hold spiritual energy. Diviners began using metal objects as tools for ritual. Bronze mirrors reflected light in unexpected ways, allowing individuals to gaze into surfaces that seemed to shimmer with hidden meaning. Metal blades, bells, and ornaments were also used in rituals to summon or guide spirits. Through all these developments, one principle remained constant. The world was alive with messages. Every gust of wind, every shift in shadow, every sound, every dream carried potential meaning. Divination provided a framework for understanding these messages, transforming ordinary experience into a tapestry of cosmic significance. As people refined this framework, they laid the foundations for the highly structured divinatory systems that would emerge in ancient civilizations. These early practices shaped not only the spiritual life of communities, but also their emotional landscape. People felt supported by invisible forces and guided by patterns that transcended individual experience. Divination offered a source of comfort during uncertainty, a source of wisdom during difficult decisions, and a source of connection during moments of isolation. It turned life into a conversation with the universe, a dialogue that continued with every breath. As the Neolithic world expanded and communities formed more complex networks, divination evolved alongside human consciousness. It deepened, diversified, and grew more sophisticated. The practices developed during this era would echo across time, influencing traditions in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and beyond. The ancient art of seeing the unseen, born in early human imagination, prepared the world for the next stage of its long journey. When the first cities began to rise from the fertile soil of Mesopotamia, divination entered a new stage of development. The region's unpredictable floods, scorching summers, and shifting rivers created an environment where uncertainty shaped every aspect of life. Communities depended on precise timing for planting, harvesting, and maintaining irrigation systems. As a result, the desire to understand hidden forces became more urgent than ever. People turned to divination not only for spiritual guidance, but also for practical survival. What had once been the intuitive art of early shamans evolved into a specialized discipline practiced by trained experts who held significant influence within society. Mesopotamia was a land of firsts. The first cities, the first written language, the first administrative systems, and the first recorded traditions of divination all emerged in this region. With writing came the ability to record signs, outcomes, and interpretations, transforming divination from an oral tradition into a highly structured system. Clay tablets filled with cuneiform symbols documented centuries of observations. These records became reference guides for generations of diviners, allowing them to refine their understanding of omens and develop sophisticated methods of prediction. Among the most influential forms of divination in Mesopotamia was the interpretation of celestial events. The vast open skies of the region allowed people to observe stars, planets, and the moon with remarkable clarity. Over time, they noticed patterns in the sky that aligned with certain earthly events. A sudden dimming of a star might coincide with a political upheaval. A comet streaking across the night sky might precede a famine. These connections were recorded meticulously. Diviners believed that the heavens were a vast script written by the gods, where every movement revealed divine intentions. The role of the diviner in Mesopotamian society was both scholarly and spiritual. These individuals studied for years to master the art of interpreting omens. They examined celestial patterns, weather signs, the behavior of animals, and the outcomes of rituals. Their work required careful attention to detail, deep memory, and the ability to connect subtle signs with larger patterns. They served kings, advised military leaders, and guided public decisions. Their interpretations shaped the course of wars, the timing of construction projects, and the rituals performed to maintain harmony with the gods. One of the most distinctive forms of Mesopotamian divination was ecstasispasy, the reading of animal organs, especially the liver. The practice emerged from the belief that the liver was the seat of life and the organ through which divine will flowed. Priests and diviners performed elaborate rituals before examining the organ of a sacrificed animal, typically a sheep. They studied its shape, markings, and texture. They looked for unusual protrusions, depressions, or discolorations. This detail was believed to correspond to a specific message from the gods. An abnormality in one section of the liver might indicate danger to the king. Smooth surface in another area might signal success in a military campaign. Clay models of sheep livers have been discovered in ancient temples, carved with intricate markings that correspond to specific omens. These models served as teaching tools, allowing students to memorize the complex system of associations between liver features and divine messages. The precision of this practice reveals the Mesopotamians' deep commitment to understanding the intentions of the gods. Divination was not imagined as a vague form of intuition, but as a disciplined science of science supported by centuries of accumulated knowledge. Omen texts, some containing thousands of entries, show how comprehensive Mesopotamian divinatory systems became. These texts cataloged signs from every aspect of life. If a particular cloud formation appeared at sunset, it meant one thing. If a specific type of insect emerged after rainfall, it meant another. The outcome of a birth, whether human or animal, could be interpreted as an omen for the household or the community. Nothing was too small to escape notice. Every detail was part of a cosmic conversation. The political power of diviners grew along with the complexity of their knowledge. Kings relied heavily on their interpretations, believing that divine approval or warning determined the success of their reigns. Before embarking on military campaigns, rulers performed rituals seeking guidance from the gods. Diviners conducted ecstasispasy, observed celestial patterns, and interpreted dream omens. If the signs were unfavorable, kings sometimes postponed campaigns or altered strategies. If the signs were favorable, they proceeded with confidence. This reliance gave diviners immense influence. They were trusted with secrets, consulted on major decisions, and given access to the highest levels of leadership. Their role blended religious authority with scientific observation, establishing them as key figures in the administration of early civilizations. Temples often served as centers of both ritual and scholarship, where diviners recorded their knowledge, trained students, and refined their methods. Divination also shaped the spiritual worldview of Mesopotamian society. People believed that the gods communicated constantly, and that science reflected divine emotions. The idea of appeasing the gods through rituals, offerings, and moral conduct was intertwined with omens that revealed whether the gods were pleased or displeased. When disasters occurred, such as floods or crop failures, people interpreted these events as signals that something in their relationship with the divine needed correction. Divination provided clarity during crises, guiding the actions that communities believed would restore cosmic balance. Dreams had a special place in Mesopotamian divination. People believed that dreams carried messages from gods, ancestors, or spirits. There were professional interpreters who specialized in dream analysis. They maintained lists of dream symbols and their meanings. For example, dreaming of water might symbolize emotional transformation, while dreaming of a particular animal might indicate danger or opportunity. The interpretation of dreams was taken seriously, especially when leaders dreamt of vivid or unusual images. Those dreams could influence political decisions, including alliances and treaties. Another unique form of divination in Mesopotamia involved interpreting the behavior of newborn animals or unusual births. If a sheep gave birth to a lamb with deformities, the event was seen as a message from the gods. The nature of the deformity indicated the content of the message. Some deformities signaled danger to leadership, while others warned of natural disasters. These interpretations were recorded in omen catalogs, forming a comprehensive system that connected biological anomalies with cosmic significance. Weather signs also played a crucial role. The timing of storms, the appearance of rainbows, the shape of lightning, and the behavior of winds were all interpreted as divine messages. In an environment where survival depended on controlling water through irrigation, understanding weather patterns was essential. Diviners observed changes in the natural world with a sensitivity cultivated over generations. Their interpretations influenced agricultural planning and religious rituals designed to maintain balance with the forces of nature. The Mesopotamian approach to divination was grounded in the belief that the universe was ordered and that divine will was encoded in patterns. These patterns could be read by those who possessed the knowledge and discipline to interpret them correctly. This belief system fostered a worldview in which humanity was not separate from the cosmos, but a participant in its unfolding story. Divination became a way to navigate that story with greater understanding. With the rise of city-states, divination also began to intersect with legal and administrative systems. Disputes were sometimes settled through rituals that invoked divine judgment. Oaths sworn during legal proceedings often referenced the gods, and breaking an oath was believed to invite divine punishment. Divination helped guide judgments by revealing hidden truths or indicating whether someone's actions aligned with cosmic order. The ethical dimension of divination grew as people linked moral behavior with favorable signs and immoral behavior with ominous warnings. The connection between celestial observation and divination became increasingly sophisticated. Mesopotamian scholars charted the movements of planets and stars with remarkable accuracy. They recognized recurring cycles and created mathematical models that predicted celestial events. These observations formed the basis of early astronomy, though they were inseparable from spiritual interpretation. The rising of certain stars marked agricultural cycles. The appearance of particular constellations signaled ritual seasons. Celestial patterns were not merely scientific data, but messages from divine beings whose movements shaped human destiny. The concept of planetary deities strengthened this connection. Each celestial body was associated with a specific god or goddess. The movement of that body reflected the mood or intentions of the associated deity. When Mars appeared brightly in the sky, it signaled the influence of a warlike god. When Venus shone with unusual brilliance, it might reflect the presence of a goddess associated with love or fertility. These interpretations created a symbolic language that connected celestial events with earthly experiences, blending observation with mythology. As trade increased, divinatory knowledge spread between regions. Merchants traveling between Mesopotamia and neighboring lands carried stories of omens, interpretations, and rituals. Diviners from different cities learned from one another, creating a shared regional culture of spiritual interpretation. This exchange helped establish divination as a cornerstone of ancient Near Eastern religion and governance. It also influenced practices in surrounding regions, laying foundations for divinatory systems in cultures that emerged later. One of the most intriguing aspects of Mesopotamian divination was the belief in divine writing. People believed that the gods inscribed messages on every aspect of reality. These inscriptions were not written with physical ink, but through the arrangement of natural phenomena, the wind, the stars, the organs of animals, and the patterns of weather, all formed letters in a divine script. Diviners learned to read this script by studying the relationships between signs and outcomes. This idea of a universe written by divine intelligence shaped later traditions that viewed nature as a sacred text. Temples played a central role in preserving and transmitting divinatory knowledge. They served as centers of learning where scribes copied omen texts, diviners trained apprentices, and priests performed rituals that aligned the community with divine forces. These institutions maintained continuity across generations, ensuring that ancient observations were not lost. The existence of vast omen archives attests to the Mesopotamians' dedication to preserving the art of reading signs. Despite the complexity of their systems, the underlying motivation remained simple. People wanted to feel guided in a world filled with uncertainty. Divination offered a sense of control, a way to anticipate danger, and a means to interpret events that might otherwise seem random. This provided emotional comfort by framing life within a larger cosmic narrative. The belief that the gods communicated through signs allowed people to navigate their lives with courage, care, purpose, and a sense of connection to forces greater than themselves. As Mesopotamian civilization continued to evolve, divination expanded beyond temples and royal courts. Ordinary people consulted diviners for personal matters, such as relationships, health, and household decisions. Simple forms of divination, such as casting lots or interpreting unusual events in daily life, became accessible to families who could not consult the royal diviners. This democratization of divination strengthened its presence in everyday life and contributed to its endurance across centuries. Even as cities rose and fell, as dynasties changed, and as new cultures emerged, the Mesopotamian legacy of structured divination remained. Their omen texts would influence later civilizations, including the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Persians. Their celestial observations would shape astrology. Their belief in divine messages encoded in the natural world would echo in countless traditions across time. The ancient art of divination, refined through generations of recording, observing, and interpreting, became one of Mesopotamia's most enduring contributions to human consciousness. It taught people that the universe was not silent. It taught them that meaning could be found in every detail of existence. It taught them that by listening carefully and observing patiently, they could catch glimpses of the unseen forces shaping their lives. This approach to understanding the world prepared humanity for the grand systems of divination that would rise in the civilizations surrounding Mesopotamia. Among these, none would rival the scale, mystery, the spiritual depth of ancient Egypt, where the search for hidden knowledge took on a profoundly symbolic and mystical form. As civilization flourished along the Nile, Divination assumed forms shaped by the land's gentle cycles and profound spiritual symbolism. Unlike the unpredictable rivers of Mesopotamia, the Nile flowed with regular rhythm, rising and falling in a pattern so steady that it seemed guided by the hand of a benevolent cosmic intelligence. This reliability influenced the character of Egyptian spirituality. People perceived the world as balanced, harmonious, and ordered according to principles that reflected a deep cosmic truth. Divination in Egypt was shaped by this worldview, becoming not merely a means of prediction, but an art focused on aligning human life with universal harmony. Egyptian thought was built around the concept of Mat, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. Was not an abstract idea, but a living presence believed to guide every aspect of existence. The role of divination in Egypt centered on maintaining this balance. Priests, seers, and dream interpreters sought to understand whether actions aligned with Mat or strayed into chaos. Every sign was evaluated through the lens of harmony. If an omen warned of imbalance, rituals were performed to restore order before misfortune could manifest. Temples served as centers for divinatory practice. These grand structures, filled with columns, statues, and chambers aligned with the movement of the sun, were built as earthly reflections of the cosmic realm. Priests performed rituals at dawn, noon, and dusk, each moment calibrated to celestial patterns. The movement of light across temple floors created shifting shapes that priests observed carefully, reading subtle signs in the relationship between sunlight and carved images. These changes were interpreted as messages from the gods, revealing whether divine favor flowed toward the people or receded. One of the most ancient Egyptian methods of divination involved dream interpretation. The Egyptians believed that during sleep, the soul traveled beyond the body and entered the realm of gods and spirits. In this realm, the soul encountered symbols, beings, and landscapes that conveyed messages about earthly life. Dream temples, known as incubation centers, were built specifically for individuals seeking divine guidance through sleep. People traveled long distances to spend nights in these sacred spaces, hoping that dreams formed within temple walls would hold clearer guidance than ordinary dreams. When someone awoke from a vivid dream, they reported the details to trained interpreters. These interpreters had memorized extensive collections of dream symbols and the meanings associated with them. For example, dreaming of water might signify purification, healing, or emotional renewal. Seeing a snake could represent transformation or hidden danger. Encountering a deity in a dream was considered one of the most powerful signs, believed to offer direct instructions from the divine. Dream interpretation became a refined art, combining intuition with centuries of accumulated knowledge. In addition to dreams, the Egyptians believed that the gods communicated through statues. Sacred statues placed in temples were not viewed as symbolic representations. They were believed to be inhabited by the divine presence. Priests performed rituals to awaken these statues each morning, washing them, anointing them with oils, dressing them in fine linens, and offering food. These actions were performed not for symbolic meaning, but because the gods were believed to occupy the statues in a literal sense. During rituals, the positioning of a statue with shadows that fell across its surface, or the way incense smoke drifted around it, could be interpreted as signs. Oracular consultations became a widespread form of divination. People approached temple statues with questions, written on papyrus or spoken aloud. Priests carried the statues in processions, and the movement of the statue was interpreted as the god's response. A forward movement indicated agreement. Backward movement signaled denial. Sometimes the statue turned slightly, suggesting that the answer required deeper consideration. These practices reinforced the belief that the gods were actively engaged in human affairs and willing to provide guidance through subtle gestures. Egyptian diviners also used written texts in ways that remain mysterious. The Book of the Dead, the coffin texts, and later ritual writings contained spells, invocations, and sacred knowledge intended to guide souls in the afterlife. However, these texts also influenced divinatory practices among the living. The imagery and symbolism contained within them provided frameworks for interpreting signs. Scenes depicting gods judging souls, weighing hearts, or revealing hidden truths influenced the way priests understood messages received in dreams or rituals. The written word itself held power, believed to carry echoes of divine speech. Another important method of divination in Egypt involved observing the natural world, especially the sky. The Egyptians tracked the rising and setting of stars with remarkable precision. The heliacal rising of Sirius, which occurred just before the annual flood of the Nile, was one of the most important celestial events. Its appearance in the early morning sky announced the beginning of a new year. This alignment between celestial and earthly cycles reinforced the belief that the heavens communicated directly with the land. Diviners studied these alignments to anticipate changes in seasons, predict agricultural cycles, and determine auspicious times for rituals. Water, too, played a central role in divination. The Egyptians viewed the Nile as a sacred artery connecting the human world with the divine. Its waters were believed to carry spiritual messages. In certain rituals, priests observed light reflecting on the surface of still water. The ripples created by gentle movements were interpreted as signs, revealing whether harmony prevailed or disruptions loomed. Water, with its reflective surface, became a mirror that allowed glimpses of hidden truths. The art of scrying, gazing into reflective surfaces to receive visions, developed in Egypt through the use of polished obsidian mirrors. These mirrors, crafted with exquisite smoothness, were used in rituals that invited visions from the unseen realm. A diviner might gaze into the black surface while chanting invocations, allowing the mind to drift into a meditative state. In this state, images appeared not as direct visions, but as impressions that arose in the space between perception and imagination. These impressions were believed to come from gods, spirits, or ancestral forces. While priests formed the primary class responsible for divination, ordinary Egyptians also sought messages through everyday events. The flight of birds, the behavior of animals, the appearance of unusual patterns in the sky, or the sudden occurrence of rare natural phenomena were interpreted as omens. People believed that the gods communicated not only through grand rituals, but also through the simple details of daily life. A sudden gust of wind that extinguished a candle during a gathering might be seen as a sign that a decision needed reconsideration. These interpretations gave people a sense of connection to the divine within the flow of ordinary experience. One of the most fascinating Egyptian practices involved the interpretation of incense smoke. Incense was burned constantly in temples and homes. Its rising smoke represented a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Priests observed the shape, direction, and movement of the smoke to discern messages. A straight and high column of smoke might signify approval from the gods. Smoke that twisted sharply or drifted unpredictably could indicate a warning. The scent of different resins was believed to attract specific gods, allowing priests to tailor rituals to the particular nature of the guidance sought. Divination in Egypt was also tied to healing. Priests who specialized in medical practices, known as swin, often performed rituals to determine the spiritual cause of illness. They observed symptoms not only through physical signs, but through symbolic interpretations. A fever might indicate that a spirit had disturbed the individual. A persistent dream could suggest an imbalance in emotional or spiritual forces. Healing involved both physical remedies and rituals that restored harmony. Divination provided guidance on which plants, rituals, or incantations would be most effective. In funerary contexts, divination took on a profound significance. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transition into another realm. The journey of the soul required knowledge, protection, and alignment with cosmic order. Divinatory practices guided preparations for burial, determining the most auspicious dates, the correct rituals to perform, and the proper invocation of protective deities. The weighing of the heart in the afterlife, a central concept in Egyptian spirituality, mirrored the role of divination in life. Just as the heart was weighed against the feather of mat, diviners weighed signs to determine whether actions aligned with cosmic truth. As Egyptian civilization advanced, so did the professionalism of its diviners. They studied vast collections of temple inscriptions, mythological narratives, and astronomical records. Their training involved memorizing rituals, learning symbolic language, and mastering the art of interpreting complex signs. These specialists formed an intellectual class dedicated to maintaining harmony between the human world and the divine. Their work influenced everything from political decisions to architectural design. Temples and monuments were aligned with celestial events, not for aesthetic reasons, but because diviners believed such alignments strengthened the energy flowing between the worlds. The Egyptians also practiced oracular interpretation through sacred animals. Certain animals, such as cats, hawks, ibises, and crocodiles, were believed to embody the presence of specific deities. Observing the behavior of these animals provided insight into divine intentions. A sudden cry from a sacred bird during a ritual might be interpreted as approval. A particular movement of a temple cat might be seen as a sign that a decision required reconsideration. These interpretations were rooted in the belief that animals possessed direct connections to the divine, making their actions meaningful beyond ordinary understanding. The sacred presence of animals also influenced the design of divinatory rituals. Priests performed ceremonies in the presence of specific animals associated with the deity whose guidance they sought. Their reactions, movements, or stillness shaped the interpretation of ritual outcomes. These practices strengthened the bond between humans and the natural world, reinforcing the belief that the divine expressed itself through all living beings. Egyptian divination was deeply intertwined with art and symbolism. The walls of temples and tombs were covered with images that conveyed complex layers of meaning. These images were not merely decorative. They were visual maps of spiritual truth. Diviners used these symbols as reference points when interpreting signs. A depiction of a god holding a particular object, standing in a specific pose, or surrounded by certain symbols suggested interpretations that guided ritual and prophecy. The entire visual culture of Egypt functioned as a vast symbolic language. The use of hieroglyphs further enriched divinatory understanding. Hieroglyphic symbols carried multiple meanings, allowing practitioners to interpret signs with nuance. A single glyph might represent a sound, an object, a concept, or a divine force. This layered symbolism influenced the way diviners interpreted natural signs. They believed that nature communicated in a similarly layered code. A single event could carry several meanings, depending on context. This approach allowed divination to remain flexible and expansive. Over time, the role of oracles broadened. Temples dedicated to gods such as Amen, Hathor, and Bas became well known for their oracular functions. People from distant regions traveled to these temples seeking guidance on personal matters. They asked questions about marriage, health, travel, and prosperity. The responses, given through movements of statues or dreams experienced within temple precincts, were believed to carry the authority of the gods. These journeys reinforced the cultural importance of divination, making it a central aspect of both public and private life. Egypt's long history allowed divination to evolve without interruption for millennia. Through periods of prosperity, invasion, drought, and political change, the art of interpreting signs remained a constant thread. Its practices adapted to new influences while preserving core principles rooted in harmony, symbolism, and cosmic balance. Egyptian divination shaped the world's understanding of spiritual insight, influencing later traditions in Greece, Rome, and beyond. This ancient tradition, shaped by sunlight, sacred rivers, and the belief in eternal order, prepared the foundation for the transformative ideas that would emerge in the Greek world, where divination would take on new dimensions of philosophy, revelation, and human destiny. As the civilizations of the ancient world continued to evolve, the land that would later become known for philosophy, democracy, and myth-making developed its own distinct approach to the unseen. In Greece, divination was not only a ritual art, but also a bridge between the human desire for knowledge and the intellectual curiosity that defined Greek culture. While earlier civilizations grounded divination in sacred temples and rituals performed by priests, the Greeks intertwined it with questions about fate, free will, and the nature of truth. Their worldview blended myth, reason, and symbolism, creating a unique landscape where divine messages and human inquiry met. Greek society was steeped in stories about gods who walked among mortals, heroes whose journeys shaped nations, and oracles who spoke truths that bent the course of history. These stories formed a psychological foundation for divination, giving meaning to signs and revelations that seemed to emerge from hidden realms. While the Greeks inherited some divinatory concepts from older cultures, they transformed them into a system infused with reflection and interpretation, giving rise to practices that influenced the entire Mediterranean world. One of the most renowned centers of divination in Greece was the Oracle of Delphi. Nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, surrounded by cliffs and sacred springs, Delphi was considered the navel of the world. According to myth, Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met at Delphi, marking it as the center of cosmic balance. This symbolic geography made the site a natural locus for divine communication. Pilgrims traveled from across Greece and beyond to consult the oracle, seeking answers to questions that shaped both private and public life. The oracle was embodied by the Pythia, a priestess chosen for her purity and ability to enter altered states. She sat upon a tripod above a chasm from which vapors rose, believed to carry the essence of the earth and the breath of Apollo. In ritual, the Pythia chewed laurel leaves, inhaled the vapors, and entered a trance in which her voice transformed. Her words, often cryptic and poetic, were recorded by priests who interpreted them for those who sought guidance. The messages were not direct instructions, but symbolic revelations requiring contemplation. This ambiguity reflected the Greek belief that divine truth was layered and rarely straightforward. The influence of Delphi extended far beyond its sacred precinct. Kings consulted it before waging war. Colonies were founded based on its guidance. Laws were shaped by its pronouncements. Yet the Greeks did not accept these messages blindly. They approached oracles with a blend of reverence and inquiry. When a prophecy emerged, people debated its meaning, questioned its implications, and considered multiple interpretations. This interplay between the divine and the intellectual made Greek divination both mystical and philosophical. Delphi was not the only site of divination. Another important center was the Oracle of Dodona, one of the oldest sacred sites in Greece. Here, messages were believed to come from Zeus through the rustling of leaves in sacred oak trees. Priests and priestesses listened to the sound of the wind, the creaking of branches, and the movement of doves, interpreting these natural phenomena as the voice of the god. Unlike Delphi, where trance states produced symbolic speech, Dodona relied on the subtle language of nature. This practice preserved some of the earliest forms of divination, rooted in the observation of the natural world. In addition to oracular centers, Greece developed its own systems of private divination. One of the most common methods was cleromancy, the casting of lots. Individuals carried small stones, bones, or marked pieces of wood that they cast onto a surface. The position and orientation of the objects were interpreted according to established guidelines. This practice provided a personal way for individuals to seek guidance on everyday matters, complementing the grand oracular pronouncements that shaped public decisions. Greek mythology reinforced the belief that messages from the unseen world were woven into the very fabric of life. The Moirai, or fates, were believed to spin the thread of each person's existence. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured it, and Atropos cut it, determining the moment of death. These three beings represented the idea that destiny existed as a cosmic design. Divination allowed individuals to catch glimpses of this design, helping them navigate life with greater clarity. However, the Greeks believed that not all aspects of fate were fixed. Through wisdom and virtue, individuals could influence their destiny, shaping the course of their lives within the limits of divine will. Another distinctive Greek contribution to the art of divination was the practice of necromancy. The Greeks believed that the spirits of the dead retained knowledge unavailable to the living. Ritual sites known as necromantia allowed individuals to contact these spirits. One of the most famous locations was the necromantia of Acheron, situated near the river believed to lead to the underworld. Visitors underwent purification rituals, fasted, and entered subterranean chambers where they encountered visions, voices, or symbolic experiences interpreted as communication with the dead. These rituals offered profound insight into unresolved questions and personal dilemmas. Dream interpretation played a significant role in Greek divination as well. The Greeks believed dreams were one of the clearest channels through which the gods communicated. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, served as centers for dream incubation. People seeking healing slept within the temple after rituals designed to invite divine visions. The dreams that followed often provided guidance for treatment or revealed the emotional and spiritual roots of illness. Priests trained in dream interpretation helped individuals understand the symbolism within their visions. This practice blended spiritual insight with early forms of psychological healing. Unlike some earlier cultures, the Greeks approached divination with a strong sense of dialectical inquiry. Philosophers debated the nature of fate, the reliability of omens, and the ethical implications of seeking knowledge about the future. Some thinkers, such as Plato, accepted the existence of divine messages, but questioned the clarity of human interpretation. Others, like Aristotle, attempted to explain certain phenomena through natural causes, while acknowledging that some events seemed to defy rational explanation. These discussions enriched the intellectual depth of divination, placing it within the broader context of Greek thought. The Greeks also explored the concept of personal daimon, a guiding spirit assigned to each individual at birth. This daimon influenced destiny, intuition, and life direction. Socrates famously spoke of his daemonion, an inner voice that warned him when he was about to act wrongly, while not a method of formal divination. The idea of an inner guide reflected the belief that spiritual insight could arise from within as well as from external signs. This concept foreshadowed later ideas about intuition and inner wisdom. Symbolic interpretation extended into Greek rituals involving animals. Augury, though more strongly associated with Rome, existed in Greek tradition as well. The behavior of birds, especially their flight patterns and calls, was believed to reveal the will of the gods. Observing a bird flying to the right might signify a favorable outcome, while a bird flying to the left could indicate caution. These interpretations varied by region, but were rooted in the belief that nature mirrored divine intention. Sacrificial rituals also played a role in divination. After an animal was sacrificed, priests examined its organs, particularly the liver, to determine whether the gods approved of the action being considered. This practice, inherited partly from Near Eastern cultures, adapted into the Greek worldview through symbolic associations tied to their mythology and cosmology. The texture, color, and shape of the organs provided clues that priests interpreted with care. While influenced by earlier traditions, the Greeks added layers of symbolic interpretation that aligned with their broader views about cosmic harmony. One of the distinguishing features of Greek divination was its compatibility with the development of philosophy. Instead of seeing divination and rational inquiry as opposing forces, Greek culture allowed them to coexist. Divination offered a way to understand the world's hidden aspects, while philosophy explored the nature of reality, knowledge, and virtue. The two approaches complemented each other, providing a comprehensive framework for understanding both the visible and invisible dimensions of life. This synthesis appears clearly in Greek literature. The epics of Homer include numerous examples of omens, dreams, and prophetic declarations that guide the actions of heroes. In the Iliad, the flight of birds, the appearance of snakes, and the visions of seers play crucial roles in determining military strategies. In the Odyssey, dreams and divine signs shape Odysseus' journey home. These stories preserved the cultural importance of divination, embedding it in the collective consciousness through poetic imagery and narrative power. Greek tragedy further highlighted the tension between fate and free will. Characters such as Oedipus, Cassandra, and Agamemnon grappled with divine prophecies that shaped their destinies. These stories explored the complexities of interpreting signs correctly. They revealed the dangers of misunderstanding divine intentions or attempting to avoid fate. At the same time, they emphasized moral responsibility, suggesting that individuals remained accountable for their choices despite the presence of destiny. This interplay enriched the cultural understanding of divination, making it not only a spiritual practice, but also a moral and philosophical inquiry. Sometimes, divination took surprising forms. Methods such as hydromancy, which involved interpreting the movement of water, and alluromancy, which used symbolic messages baked into small balls of dough, provided access to divine messages through unexpected mediums. These practices illustrated the Greek belief that the divine could speak through any substance or phenomena if one learned to see with clarity. Divination also played a practical role in everyday decisions. Families consulted seers before arranging marriages, traveling, or making significant economic choices. Soldiers sought omens before entering battle. Farmers interpreted seasonal signs to determine planting times. Sailors read the sky and see not only for weather patterns, but for spiritual indications of safety or danger. This integration of divination into daily life made it accessible to people of all social classes. Greek divination expanded through intellectual innovation as well. Its contact with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia increased. Greek scholars absorbed foreign ideas and adapted them to their own systems. This cross-cultural exchange enriched the symbolic frameworks used in Greek rituals. It also laid the groundwork for the development of astrology, which would later become a major form of divination throughout the Mediterranean world. In Greece, the rising use of written texts also influenced divination. Collections of oracular sayings, symbolic guides, and philosophical reflections created a body of knowledge that blended myth, observation, and intellectual insight. These texts allowed divination to spread widely, making its principles accessible even to those who could not visit major oracles. As literacy increased, the symbolic language of divination expanded into new cultural layers. What made Greek divination particularly influential was its ability to evolve. It adapted to the changing needs of society, absorbing new ideas while preserving ancient traditions. It connected the spiritual with the philosophical, the mystical with the rationale. It offered guidance through ambiguity rather than through rigid certainty. The Greek world approached divination with a sense of humility, recognizing that while the gods offered glimpses of truth, humans bore the responsibility of interpreting those truths wisely. This spirit of inquiry made Greek divination a bridge between ancient and later civilizations. Its ideas would be absorbed by the Romans, reshaped by medieval scholars, and rediscovered during the Renaissance. It provided the foundation for later discussions about destiny, intuition, and the symbolic nature of reality. As divination spread westward into Rome, it would gain new structure, new authority, and new influence within the vast expanse of an empire that valued order, discipline, and signs sanctioned by the state. As the power of Greece began to wane and Rome rose from a collection of villages to a vast empire, the nature of divination shifted once again. The Romans inherited practices from the Etruscans, the Greeks, and earlier cultures, but they transformed divination into a disciplined system embedded deeply in political, military, and civic life. While other civilizations treated divination as a sacred art practiced by priests or shamans, Rome turned it into a formal institution, regulated by the state and woven into the very structure of public decision-making. Divination became not merely a spiritual practice, but a tool of governance and legitimacy. The Etruscans, who lived in the region north of what would become Rome, were known throughout the ancient world for their mastery of interpreting divine signs. Their culture, older than the earliest Roman institutions, viewed the universe as governed by powerful forces whose intentions could be understood through careful observation. They believed that gods communicated through lightning, the flight of birds, the shape of livers, and the movements of the natural world. This worldview fascinated the early Romans, who adopted Etruscan methods and adapted them to their own expanding society. One of the most influential Etruscan practices was haruspicy, the reading of animal entrails, especially the liver. The Etruscans created detailed bronze models of livers divided into sections corresponding to different deities. Haruspices, or diviners, trained in this art, memorized the meaning of each section and interpreted irregularities in real livers. When Rome absorbed Etruscan territory, it also absorbed their diviners. Haruspices became respected figures within Roman religious life, consulted whenever disturbing natural phenomena occurred or when public decisions required divine approval. Augury, however, became the distinctly Roman form of divination that defined the empire's relationship with the unseen. Augurs were priests trained to interpret the will of the gods through signs in the sky, especially the flight of birds. They observed the direction birds flew, the patterns they formed, the sounds they made, and their behavior in relation to sacred boundaries. These observations were believed to reflect whether the gods approved or disapproved of a proposed action. Before elections, military campaigns, building projects, or major political decisions, augurs performed rituals known as taking the auspices. The term auspices, which survives today in phrases like under good auspices, originated from this practice. The Romans believed that nothing of public importance should occur without first consulting the gods. If the auspices were unfavorable, leaders postponed their actions. This deep integration of divine science into civic life distinguished Rome from many earlier civilizations. The state did not merely endorse divination, it required it. Sacred spaces, known as templum, were designated areas where augurs observed the sky. These spaces were not physical temples, but ritual boundaries marked by orientation lines. The augur stood within this boundary, divided the sky into sections, and interpreted any signs that appeared. The Romans believed the gods revealed their will within this structured space, allowing augurs to translate the language of the heavens into guidance for human affairs. The precision of these rituals reflected Rome's belief that order and discipline extended not only to military or legal matters, but also to divine communication. Divination was used to legitimize political authority as well. Kings and later consuls relied on auspices to justify decisions. If a leader wanted to proceed with a controversial action, favorable signs could present divine sanction. Conversely, unfavorable signs could restrain impulsive decisions or challenge corrupt leadership. In this way, divination served as both a spiritual practice and a political check. The gods, speaking through signs, held a voice within the government. The Romans also practiced augury through the interpretation of thunder and lightning, known as fulguration. The direction from which lightning struck, the place it hit, and the circumstances surrounding the event all held meaning. The Etruscan discipline of reading lightning was highly respected, and Roman leaders consulted lightning experts when storms occurred at critical moments. A bolt that struck a temple, for example, could be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure with the rituals performed there. A lightning strike near a battlefield might warn generals of impending defeat. Signs did not come only from celestial phenomena. The Romans interpreted earthly events as well. The appearance of unusual animals, the birth of deformed offspring, unexpected accidents, and even dreams experienced by citizens could be classified as prodigia or prodigies. These phenomena were believed to indicate disturbances in the relationship between the human world and the divine. When prodigies occurred, the Senate ordered rituals of expiation to restore harmony. Haruspices and priests guided these rituals, ensuring that the appropriate actions were taken to satisfy the gods. The importance of divination in Rome extended into family life as well. Private citizens consulted seers before marriages, business ventures, or travel. Household gods, known as lares and penates, were believed to guide the prosperity of the family. People observed small signs within their homes, such as the movement of fire in the hearth or the behavior of household animals, to understand these protective spirits' wishes. Although the state controlled public divination, private forms of interpretation flourished quietly within Roman households. One of the most interesting aspects of Roman divination was the integration of foreign methods through cultural expansion. As Rome spread across the Mediterranean, it encountered new traditions. Babylonian astrology impressed Roman scholars with its complexity. Egyptian dream interpretation, Greek oracular traditions, and Persian symbolic systems all entered Roman society. These influences merged with existing Roman practices, creating a tapestry of divinatory systems that coexisted and interacted. Astrology, in particular, became increasingly popular as Rome encountered Eastern cultures. Soldiers, merchants, and scholars adopted horoscopic methods that interpreted personality and destiny based on the positions of celestial bodies at birth. Despite its growing popularity, astrology was approached with caution by the Roman state. Leaders feared that predictions regarding the fate of emperors could inspire rebellion. Thus, laws were sometimes enacted to regulate astrologers. Yet, even with restrictions, astrology flourished among the populace, offering a personal form of divination that complemented state-regulated methods. The Romans embraced the idea that the heavens held secrets about life's direction, and that skilled interpreters could unveil these secrets. The practice of lots also persisted. In Rome, this method, known as sortilege, involved drawing marked objects from containers. Temples sometimes maintained sacred lots believed to offer guidance. The most famous of these were the sortes et praenesti, where individuals sought answers to personal questions. These responses, written in poetic form, blended chance with divine insight. Sortilege provided a flexible form of divination accessible to people who lacked the privileges required to consult augurs or state priests. Roman literature reflects the cultural importance of divination. In the works of Virgil, omens guide heroes on their journeys. In the writings of Livy, auspices influence political decisions and military strategies. Cicero, one of Rome's most respected intellectuals, wrote an entire treatise analyzing divination. Although he questioned certain methods, he acknowledged the deep connection between divine signs and human understanding. His reflections reveal how Romans balanced skepticism with reverence, creating a nuanced framework for interpreting the unseen. The relationship between divination and war was particularly strong in Rome. Before battles, generals performed sacrifices and sought auspices. They examined the entrails of animals for signs of victory or defeat. They interpreted the behavior of birds, the movement of clouds, and the direction of winds. Soldiers believed that divine favor influenced the outcome of battles. A favorable omen raised morale, while an unfavorable one could cast a shadow over an entire campaign. The Romans viewed war as an endeavor requiring not only strategy and strength, but alignment with the gods. One of the most symbolic elements of Roman military augury was the sacred chickens. These birds, kept by augurs, were fed before important decisions. Their eating behavior revealed divine approval or disapproval. The chickens ate eagerly and dropped food from their beaks. The omen was favorable. If they refused to eat, the sign was negative. Although this practice seems unusual today, it was taken seriously by Roman commanders. There were even instances where military leaders faced consequences for ignoring unfavorable signs. Divination also intersected with Roman legal and moral life. When unusual events occurred, the Senate sometimes convened to interpret their significance. If a prodigy seemed to warn of moral decay, leaders used it as an opportunity to introduce reforms. This practice linked divine messages with ethical behavior, reinforcing the belief that the gods cared not only about ritual correctness, but also about the moral condition of society. Divination became a mirror reflecting the collective conscience of Rome. The Roman calendar itself held divinatory significance. Certain days were considered favorable for particular activities, while others were avoided due to historical associations with misfortune. Priests maintained calendars that guided public behavior, distinguishing between days reserved for legal actions, days appropriate for religious rituals, and days that required caution. This careful organization reflected Rome's belief that time itself carried divine rhythms. Despite the formal nature of Roman divination, it remained flexible enough to adapt to personal needs. Individuals carried amulets, observed personal omens, and practiced intuitive forms of interpretation. They believed that the gods sometimes communicated through unexpected events that held meaning only for the individual who experienced them. Sudden encounter with a particular animal, a strange sound heard at a significant moment, or a vivid dream could carry messages that required personal contemplation. This blend of formal and informal divination strengthened the connection between the divine and daily life. As the Roman Empire expanded, divination helped justify its conquests. Leaders believed that Rome's success reflected divine favor. Victories were interpreted as signs that the gods supported the empire's mission to bring order to the world. When disaster struck, they were interpreted as warnings that required ritual correction. Divination thus shaped the narrative of Roman history, intertwining spiritual belief with political identity. Over time, the influence of Greek philosophy deepened the intellectual dimensions of Roman divination. Stoicism, in particular, offered a framework that integrated divine signs with a rational understanding of the universe. Stoic thinkers believed that the world was permeated by a divine order known as logos. Everything that occurred, including omens, reflected this underlying order. Divination became a means of perceiving the rational structure of existence rather than simply predicting future events. This philosophical shift elevated divination from ritual practice to a contemplative art. As Roman culture absorbed influences from across the Mediterranean, it prepared the groundwork for later transformations. Divination would evolve once again as new religions emerged, new philosophical ideas spread, and new interactions between East and West shaped spiritual practices. The Roman approach, disciplined, structured, intertwined with governance, created a foundation upon which later cultures would build. It preserved ancient traditions while opening space for new ones, ensuring that the art of reading the unseen continued to grow. Rome's legacy in divination reflected the empire's broader character: orderly, pragmatic, expansive, and deeply respectful of signs that connected human life with cosmic forces. As the empire stretched across continents, it carried these traditions to distant regions, influencing practices far beyond its borders. Yet, even as Rome's political power eventually declined, the symbolic language of divination endured. It entered medieval thought, shaped early Christian perspectives on science and prophecy, and continued to evolve as new cultures rose to prominence. The next great chapter of divination would unfold in lands where prophecy took on a moral dimension. Visions shaped spiritual identity, and messages from the unseen world were woven into sacred history. In the ancient Near East, among the Hebrews and their neighboring cultures, divination would encounter a new form of spiritual intensity, reshaping the way humanity understood communication with the divine. As Rome exerted its influence across vast territories, another cultural and spiritual current continued to flow through the ancient Near East. This region, rich with history, prophecy, and profound encounters with the unseen, developed its own distinctive relationship with divination. The traditions that arose among the Hebrews and their neighbors reshaped the meaning of divine communication, shifting emphasis from ritual techniques and symbolic interpretations to moral insight, covenantal responsibility, and the powerful voice of prophetic vision. In this world, divination was not merely the art of predicting events, but the deep spiritual act of discerning the will of a singular, transcendent God. In earlier Near Eastern cultures, divination resembled the structured systems of Mesopotamia, involving ectyspy, astrology, and dream interpretation. But within the Hebrew worldview, something transformed. Instead of viewing divine messages as encoded in material signs alone, the Hebrews increasingly believed that God communicated directly through chosen individuals. The prophet, rather than the priest or the ritual diviner, became the primary conduit of divine knowledge. This shift changed the trajectory of divination, introducing a form of revelation that emphasized ethical guidance, spiritual accountability, and the inner transformation of individuals and communities. The earliest Hebrew traditions did not reject other forms of divination entirely. They inherited practices familiar across the ancient Near East. Objects such as the Urim and Thummim were used in priestly contexts, especially during the early tribal period. These sacred lots, kept within the breastplate of the high priest, were believed to reveal divine judgment when questions of great importance arose. The exact nature of the Urim and Thummim remains mysterious, but many scholars believe they may have involved stones or objects that indicated specific outcomes. Their use reflected the belief that God offered direction in moments of uncertainty, guiding leaders toward choices aligned with divine intention. Dreams also played a significant role in Hebrew spirituality. The stories preserved in early texts revealed dreams as powerful vehicles of divine revelation. Figures such as Jacob, Joseph, and Samuel received messages through dreams that shaped not only their personal destinies, but the fate of entire nations. These dreams were not interpreted through technical manuals, as in Mesopotamia. Instead, they were imbued with moral and spiritual significance. A dream could reveal a promised future, warn of danger, or call someone to a new path of responsibility. The content of dreams was trusted because the source was believed to be God, speaking through symbolic imagery tailored to the dreamer. Joseph, in particular, exemplified the Hebrew approach to dream interpretation. He understood dreams not as random occurrences, but as messages woven into the fabric of divine providence. When he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, revealing the coming years of plenty and famine, his insights saved countless lives. These stories demonstrate how, in the Hebrew tradition, divination ceased to be a method of reading signs from impersonal forces and became a means of discerning the purposeful will of a personal God. Prophecy emerged as the defining feature of Hebrew divination. The prophet was not selected through lineage or formal training. Prophets were individuals called by God, often through overwhelming visions or profound inner experiences that redirected the course of their lives. Their role was not to perform rituals or interpret signs through established systems. Instead, they received direct communication through visions, dreams, and inner conviction. These messages often challenged the people to reflect, repent, and renew their spiritual commitments. The prophetic experience was intense, vivid, and at times overwhelming. Prophets described hearing voices, seeing symbolic imagery, and receiving messages that burned within them until spoken aloud. Their visions were filled with metaphors, cosmic landscapes, and moral urgency. Some prophets spoke of heavenly councils, where divine beings discussed the fate of nations, Others described encounters with angels or moments when the natural world seemed to dissolve, revealing the deeper spiritual truths beneath surface reality. Unlike diviners in other cultures, Hebrew prophets emphasized ethical transformation. Okay. They warned against injustice, idolatry, and moral decay. They reminded leaders that divine favor was tied not only to ritual correctness, but to righteousness, compassion, and humility. Through prophecy, divination became a force for social reform. The prophet's message carried weight, not because of ritual technique, but because it was believed to reflect the unchanging will of a just and compassionate God. Prophets sometimes performed symbolic actions to communicate their messages. These embodied acts served as visual metaphors that conveyed deeper truths. For example, a prophet might wear specific garments, break pottery, or walk a certain path to reflect coming events. These actions drew attention, compelling the community to consider the spiritual meaning behind them. Such symbols enriched the prophetic message, blending physical gesture with divine revelation. Neighboring cultures in the Near East also developed strong traditions of divination. Among them, the Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Arameans practiced forms similar to those in Mesopotamia. They consulted omens, interpreted celestial movements, and sought guidance from deities through ritual objects. In many cases, these practices influenced Israelite culture, especially during periods of cultural exchange. Yet, within the Hebrew worldview, these methods were gradually reinterpreted or discouraged as prophetic revelation grew more central to spiritual life. The shift from ritual divination to prophetic revelation did not happen all at once. In earlier centuries, Israelite leaders sometimes relied on common Near Eastern practices. They observed the flight of birds, interpreted natural signs, and cast lots. Gideon, for example, sought confirmation through the behavior of dew on a fleece. Saul consulted divination before battle, and later sought answers through forbidden channels when he could no longer hear divine guidance. These stories illustrated tension between inherited practices and the emerging ideal of direct prophetic communication. The Hebrew worldview gradually discouraged methods that attempted to manipulate or predict the unseen world through ritual technique. Instead, it emphasized humility before the divine, encouraging people to listen for moral and spiritual guidance rather than attempting to control destiny. This shift marked a profound transformation in the history of divination. Communication with the unseen moved from a technical art to an intimate relationship rooted in trust, ethics, and personal devotion. The rise of written texts strengthened this transformation. Its prophetic messages were recorded, preserved, and transmitted across generations. They formed a living body of spiritual wisdom. These writings became a new kind of divinatory resource. Instead of casting lots or examining signs, people increasingly sought guidance through sacred texts. The words of prophets, written in poetic and symbolic language, became sources of insight that shaped personal decisions and collective identity. Reading and interpreting these texts became a spiritual practice in itself. The Hebrew tradition also developed the idea that divine communication extended beyond moments of crisis or revelation. Everyday events, chance encounters, and subtle shifts in circumstances were believed to reflect divine guidance. Instead of relying on formal rituals, individuals learned to perceive meaning in the flow of ordinary life. A door that opened unexpectedly, a meeting that occurred by chance, or an obstacle that arose at a critical moment could all be interpreted as part of divine orchestration. This perspective encouraged constant awareness and inner reflection. As time passed, prophetic activity expanded. As prophets arose, not only in courts or sacred spaces, but among ordinary people. Some were shepherds, craftsmen, or farmers when called. Their background did not determine their authority. What mattered was the authenticity of their visions and their dedication to speaking truth. These prophets often challenged kings and leaders, calling them to accountability. Their courage, rooted in divine conviction, changed the course of history. Neighboring cultures, too, continued to cultivate diverse forms of divination. In Persia, Zoroastrian priests observed signs to determine ritual purity and spiritual alignment. Fire, a central symbol of truth and purity, played a prominent role in their divinatory practices. In the broader Indo-Iranian tradition, rituals involving sacred chants, offerings, and interpretations of natural phenomena shaped spiritual life. These traditions influenced one another through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, creating a rich tapestry of divinatory methods across the region. While the Hebrews moved increasingly toward prophetic revelation, their neighboring cultures preserved more traditional techniques. The contrast between these approaches created a dynamic spiritual landscape, in which diverse forms of divination coexisted. People across the Near East sought meaning in stars, dreams, rituals, and visions. The interplay between cultures enriched the symbolic language used to interpret signs, yet the emphasis on moral guidance and personal transformation within the Hebrew tradition left a distinctive mark on the history of divination. As the centuries passed, political upheavals, exiles, and the rise of empires introduced new layers of complexity. The Babylonian exile, in particular, exposed the Hebrews to advanced forms of Mesopotamian astrology and omen interpretation. While some elements entered the broader cultural conversation, the core emphasis on prophetic revelation remained central. The Hebrew identity shaped itself around the belief that divine communication was not something to be manipulated, but something to be received with humility. In later periods, sacred texts became increasingly central to divinatory practice. Study, interpretation, and reflection replaced older methods. Symbolic readings of scripture formed a new kind of spiritual insight. Patterns, allegories, and hidden meanings within the texts were believed to reveal deeper truths. This form of spiritual interpretation expanded the concept of divination, transforming it from an external art into an inner journey of understanding. The legacy of Hebrew prophecy eventually influenced later religious traditions. The concept of divine revelation, moral accountability, and spiritual insight through inner experience shaped the development of Christianity and Islam. These traditions expanded and transformed the idea of divination, incorporating prophetic visions, dreams, and interpretations of sacred texts. Through them, the Hebrew approach to divine communication spread far beyond its original boundaries. While early civilizations relied on signs in nature, the Hebrew tradition revealed a new dimension of the unseen. It emphasized not only the ability to predict events, but the divine desire to guide human hearts toward justice, compassion, and spiritual integrity. This emphasis reshaped the meaning of divination, making it a vehicle for ethical transformation rather than prediction alone. As the ancient world continued to evolve, new spiritual and intellectual forces began to shape the art of seeing the unseen. In the lands of Persia and India, rich with cosmic philosophy and ritual depth, divination would once again transform, reaching toward celestial order, cosmic cycles, and the subtle interplay between human fate and universal harmony. As spiritual traditions spread across the ancient world, the lands of Persia and India emerged as centers of profound cosmological insight. These regions, connected through ancient Indo-Iranian roots, developed complex systems that blended ritual, philosophy, myth, and observation. Divination in these cultures was not merely an attempt to peer into the future. It became a way to understand cosmic order, human duty, and the unseen forces that shaped existence. While earlier societies relied on signs embedded in nature or ritual techniques, Persia and India sought harmony with a universe believed to be structured by vast metaphysical laws. In ancient Persia, Zoroastrianism played a central role in shaping divinatory practices. The teachings of Zarathustra introduced a worldview defined by an ongoing struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, order and chaos. Every act, choice, and thought participated in this cosmic battle. Divination, in this context, became a means of discerning alignment with truth, known as Asha. Instead of predicting events for personal gain, divination aimed to help individuals make choices that supported cosmic order. The focus shifted from curiosity about the future to responsibility in the present. Fire held profound significance in Zoroastrian divination. It was believed to be the purest symbol of truth, a visible manifestation of divine presence. Priests, known as mobids, tended sacred fires with great care. The way flames moved, the sound of crackling wood, and the patterns formed by smoke all carried meaning. Fire did not merely illuminate physical spaces, it illuminated the spiritual condition of those who approached it. Diviners watched flames to discern whether purity or impurity dominated a situation. Fire became both a mirror and a messenger, revealing the alignment of human actions with cosmic truth. Another method involved interpreting the actions of animals associated with purity. Dogs, revered for their protective and loyal nature, were used in rituals to identify spiritual imbalance. A dog's reaction to a person or space might signal unseen forces at work. These practices reflected the belief that animals possessed sensitivity to spiritual energies. Their behavior was not random, but guided by an instinctive attunement to the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Zoroastrian priests also paid attention to astronomical phenomena. While not as mathematically advanced as later astrologers in other regions, they observed the movements of stars and planets as reflections of divine order. The path of celestial bodies mirrored the struggle between Aja and Druj, the forces of truth and deception. Eclipses, comets, and unusual celestial events carried symbolic significance, often prompting purification rituals meant to restore harmony. For the Persians, divination and ritual worked hand in hand, reinforcing the belief that human actions influenced cosmic balance. As Persian culture influenced and interacted with the neighboring regions, divinatory practices expanded. The Magi, a priestly caste, became renowned for their knowledge of ritual, celestial observation, and dream interpretation. The wider world associated them with wisdom, mystery, and spiritual insight. Their reputation endured for centuries, shaping perceptions of Eastern divination throughout the ancient and early medieval periods. If Persia viewed divination through the lens of moral, cosmic struggle, India approached it through a vast philosophical framework grounded in cosmic cycles. Karma, and the intricate interplay of forces that shaped both material and spiritual life. The Indian subcontinent produced some of the most sophisticated divinatory traditions in history, reflecting its rich blend of spirituality, philosophy, ritual practice, and metaphysical exploration. The earliest roots of Indian divination can be traced to the Vedic period. The Vedas, sacred texts composed in ancient Sanskrit, contain hymns, rituals, and symbolic knowledge that formed the foundation of Indian spirituality. Within these texts, rituals involving fire, offerings, and sacred chants served as channels for communication with cosmic forces known as devas. Divination emerged through the interpretation of ritual outcomes. The crackling of fire, the behavior of sacrificial animals, and the result of offerings all held significance. One of the most influential early Vedic practices was the interpretation of omens known as nimitta. These omens could appear in nature, dreams, bodily sensations, or unexpected events. Instead of viewing these signs as isolated occurrences, ancient Indians understood them within the context of a universe governed by interconnected forces. A sudden sound, an unusual movement of animals, or a change in the wind could reveal underlying energies at work. This worldview integrated divination into daily life, encouraging constant awareness of the subtle interplay between the visible and invisible. India's most significant contribution to the history of divination was the development of astrology, known as Jyotisha. This system emerged from the fusion of indigenous astronomical knowledge with influences from Babylonian and later Greek traditions. Over centuries, Indian astrologers created a comprehensive system that interpreted human destiny through the positions of planets, stars, and lunar cycles. Unlike Western astrology, which often focused on personality traits or future predictions, Indian astrology emphasized karmic patterns, spiritual growth, and life purpose. Jyotisha viewed the universe as a reflection of cosmic consciousness. Each planet represented specific energies and deities, linked to 12 houses, lunar mansions, and intricate calculations offered a map of an individual's karmic path. Skilled astrologers examined birth charts not only to reveal future events, but to guide individuals toward actions that aligned with Dharma, the spiritual law governing right conduct. Astrology thus served as both a predictive and ethical system, helping individuals navigate life with awareness of their spiritual responsibilities. Beyond astrology, India cultivated numerous divinatory techniques grounded in symbolism and spiritual sensitivity. One of the most ancient methods was reading the patterns formed by oil dropped into water. The way oil spread, swirled, or separated revealed messages about hidden forces or future possibilities. This practice, known in various regions as talaprasna or similar names, connected the fluid nature of water with the fluidity of fate. Another method involved interpreting the sound and pattern of sacred chants. Certain vibrations were believed to influence spiritual energies. If a chant resonated in a specific way or produced unexpected emotional effects, it could signal the presence of divine intervention. These interpretations reflected the Indian belief in the power of sound as a creative force. Mantras were not merely words, but vehicles of divine energy that shaped outcomes through subtle vibrations. Dream interpretation in India developed a rich literature. Ancient texts cataloged thousands of dream symbols, describing their meanings in relation to spiritual development, health, or future events. Dreams featuring water, animals, celestial beings, or particular actions carried layered meanings. Indian dream interpretation drew from cosmology, mythology, and psychology. It emphasized the possibility that dreams revealed both karmic patterns and insights from deities or ancestral spirits. Indian diviners also practiced forms of spiritual intuition known as prajna or jnana, deep inner knowing, cultivated through meditation. Unlike external methods, this form of divination relied on the clarity that emerged from inner stillness. When the mind became quiet through disciplined practice, intuition arose spontaneously. This insight was seen as a form of direct perception, unclouded by desire or fear. Meditation thus became both a spiritual and divinatory practice, allowing individuals to perceive the deeper threads of destiny. Ritual divination played an important role in temple culture as well. Priests interpreted the movements of ritual flames, the sound of bells, the behavior of sacred animals, and the responses of idols during ceremonies. In some temples, objects were placed before deity statues, and the deities perceived acceptance or rejection of offerings revealed spiritual messages. The physical world was seen as a living tapestry through which divine forces expressed themselves. India also developed practices that interpreted bodily sensations as signs. Sudden chills, tingling, or involuntary movements were believed to signal the presence of spiritual forces or emotional truths. This tradition emphasized the intimate connection between body and spirit, suggesting that the inner world responded to external energies with subtle shifts. The Indian worldview, deeply grounded in interconnectedness, offered a unique understanding of fate and free will. Destiny, or prarabdha karma, represented the unfolding of past actions, but present choices, guided by awareness and spiritual discipline, could shape future karma. Divination helped individuals understand which paths supported harmony and which led to imbalance. It was not a tool to escape fate, but a compass that pointed toward spiritual alignment. The diversity of the Indian subcontinent produced numerous regional traditions. In South India, palm leaf manuscripts, known as Nadi texts, claimed to contain the destinies of individuals written centuries earlier by sages. Seekers visited Nadi readers, who matched palm leaves to fingerprints or other personal details. These manuscripts blended prophecy with karmic insight, offering a form of divination rooted in ancient memory. In other regions, diviners used seeds, shells, or stones arranged in patterns that reflected cosmic principles. These methods often combined mathematical precision with symbolic intuition. Each object represented specific energies, and their arrangement revealed the interplay of forces shaping a question or situation. The Indian approach to divination influenced neighboring cultures through trade, migration, and spiritual exchange. As Buddhist teachings spread through Asia, new forms of divination emerged, blending Indian symbolism with local beliefs. Tibetan monks developed highly structured systems of omen interpretation, combining ritual, astrology, and meditation. Southeast Asian cultures adopted Indian astrological principles and adapted them to indigenous traditions. The influence radiated outward, shaping spiritual practices far beyond the subcontinent. Despite the diversity of methods, unifying theme ran through Indian and Persian divination: the belief that the unseen world was structured by principles larger than human desire. Divination offered insight not only into events, but into the moral and spiritual conditions that shaped those events. Instead of treating destiny as a fixed line, these cultures viewed it as an unfolding journey guided by cosmic forces, personal responsibility, and the pursuit of harmony. As the ancient world continued to evolve, another civilization carried this pursuit of harmony to extraordinary heights. In China, divination would take on a depth and continuity unmatched anywhere else, becoming the longest-standing and most intricately woven system of interpreting the unseen in human history. Among the ancient civilizations of the world, none sustained a continuous and evolving tradition of divination as profoundly as China. For thousands of years, through dynasties that rose and fell, through political upheavals, through cultural transformations that reshaped language and society, the Chinese approach to reading the unseen remained steady. It adapted, expanded, and deepened, but never lost its foundational principles. At its core lay a belief that the universe operated according to patterns of harmony, rhythm, and balance. Divination was the art of discerning these patterns, understanding how they flowed through the world, and aligning one's life with their movement. Long before written history, early Chinese communities practiced forms of divination that mirrored humanity's universal impulse to find meaning in nature. Hunters observed the tracks of animals and the direction of winds. Farmers studied seasonal changes with careful attention. Clouds, birds, shadows, and the sound of flowing water shaped decisions about timing and location. These early practices laid the groundwork for more structured systems that would emerge as writing developed. The earliest definitive evidence of Chinese divination comes from the Shang dynasty, where oracle bone inscriptions reveal a sophisticated and formalized tradition. Oracle bones, typically ox scapulae or turtle plastrons, were used in rituals to seek guidance from ancestors and gods. Diviners drilled small pits into the bones, applied heat, and interpreted the cracks that formed. Each crack, shaped by heat, carried symbolic meaning. Questions about agriculture, warfare, weather, childbirth, or ritual timing were inscribed onto the bones before the ritual. After the cracks appeared, diviners recorded the answers and sometimes the outcomes, creating a body of knowledge that preserved both predictions and experiences. These inscriptions, carved into bone and shell, are some of the earliest examples of Chinese writing. They show that divination was not peripheral to society, but woven into the heart of political and spiritual life. Kings relied on oracle bone readings to make decisions of immense consequence. The practice reflected the belief that human actions needed alignment with ancestral guidance and cosmic order. Diviners served as intermediaries between realms, reading the cracks as if they were messages written by unseen hands. As Chinese culture evolved, divination expanded beyond the simple act of interpreting cracks. The Shang practice gave rise to more abstract systems grounded in philosophical reflection. Here, the most influential of these was the I Ching, or Book of Changes, an ancient text that became one of the foundational works of Chinese thought. The I Ching did not offer predictions in straightforward terms. Instead, it described the dynamic interplay of forces that shaped all things. Its wisdom lay in revealing patterns rather than events, cycles rather than moments, tendencies rather than certainties. The I Ching was built upon a system of hexagrams created by combining 6 broken or unbroken lines. Each hexagram represented a state of cosmic energy, a moment within the ceaseless flow of transformation. Diviners cast euro stocks or later coins to generate a hexagram. They then consulted the text, which provided poetic and symbolic passages describing the qualities of the moment. These passages did not prescribe specific actions, but encouraged inner reflection. The I Ching helped individuals understand the forces influencing their lives so they could act with harmony and wisdom. This approach reflected a profound philosophical insight. The universe was not static. Everything moved through cycles of growth, decline, rest, and renewal. These cycles could be discerned through attentive observation. Divination was not the attempt to control destiny, but the effort to understand the movement of energy, known as qi. By perceiving how qi flowed through a situation, a diviner could offer guidance that aligned with the natural order. The concept of yin and yang played a central role in this worldview. Yin represented qualities such as stillness, darkness, and receptivity. Yang represented action, brightness, and expansion. These forces were not opposites in conflict, but complementary energies that created balance through interaction. Every situation, every decision, every moment contained varying expressions of yin and yang. Divination helped individuals recognize these expressions, enabling choices that supported balance rather than disharmony. Over time, Chinese divination branched into numerous systems, each reflecting different facets of Chinese philosophy. One such system was Feng Shui, the art of analyzing spatial and environmental energy. Originally developed to ensure proper placement of graves, Feng Shui evolved into a comprehensive method for harmonizing human dwellings with natural forces. Practitioners studied landforms, wind patterns, sunlight, and water flow. They observed how mountains embraced valleys, how rivers curved through landscapes, and how structures influenced the movement of qi. The placement of rooms, doors, altars, and objects became part of a deliberate effort to invite prosperity, health, and peace. Feng Shui was rooted in the belief that the environment was alive with energy. The landscape itself was an expression of cosmic forces. A mountain might embody stability and protection. A river might represent movement and opportunity. By aligning human spaces with these energies, individuals could support their destiny rather than struggle against invisible tides. Feng Shui was not superstition, but a refined form of environmental intuition shaped by centuries of observation. Another important form of Chinese divination was face reading, known as physiognomy. Practitioners believed that the human face reflected both personality and destiny. The shape of the forehead, the curve of the eyebrows, the size of the ears, and the lines formed by expressions all carried symbolic meaning. These features were not viewed in isolation. They were interpreted as part of a dynamic whole, reflecting the interplay of internal and external forces. Face readers learned to see the subtle qualities that indicated strengths, challenges, or tendencies. Their insight combined intuition with symbolic interpretation, offering a window into the deeper layers of a person's life. Palm reading, too, became a refined art. The lines, mounts, and textures of the hand were believed to reveal information about character, health, and destiny. Like face reading, palmistry reflected the belief that the body expressed cosmic patterns. The hand was a map of energies moving through a person's life. Palm readers compared both hands, evaluating differences between the hand representing inherited tendencies and the hand representing cultivated choices. This dual interpretation reflected the balance between fate and free will within Chinese thought. Chinese astrology, which developed alongside philosophical and divinatory traditions, became one of the most intricate systems of its kind. It combined knowledge of celestial cycles with symbolic animals, elemental energies, and cycles of time. The 12 animals of the zodiac, combined with the 5 elements and the concept of yin and yang, created a complex structure for interpreting personality, compatibility, and life cycles. Unlike Western astrology, which relied on planetary alignments at the moment of birth, Chinese astrology emphasized time cycles that influenced both individuals and societies. The 6-year cycle, formed by combining the 10 heavenly stems with the 12 earthly branches, became a cornerstone of Chinese cosmology. Each year carried a unique, energetic quality. Astrologers interpreted these cycles not only for personal insight, but for national and agricultural planning. The belief that cosmic rhythms influenced earthly events encouraged careful observation of seasonal and celestial patterns. Diviners also used omens known as sai, which appeared in dreams, natural phenomena, or unexpected events. Like Indian nimitta, these signs were viewed as expressions of underlying energies. A sudden breakage of an object, the cry of a bird at a significant moment, or the appearance of unusual weather patterns could signal shifts in fortune. Chinese diviners did not interpret these signs through fear or superstition. They approached them with calm reflection, seeking to understand the deeper pattern they revealed. Throughout Chinese history, the role of diviners varied. In some dynasties, divination held central authority. In others, it remained a private or philosophical practice, but its presence endured in every era. Emperors consulted astrologers and I Ching masters before enacting important decisions. Scholars used divination as a tool for reflection. Ordinary people sought guidance for marriage, business, travel, or health. Divination became woven into the cultural fabric, as familiar as breath and as essential as water. The continuity of Chinese divination was supported by the preservation of classical texts. The I Ching, the Tao Te Ching, medical texts like the Wang Di, Nei Jing, and astronomical records all contributed to a unified worldview. These texts were studied for centuries by scholars who added commentaries, refined interpretations, and expanded symbolic associations. The discussion of divination became an intellectual pursuit as well as a spiritual practice. Scholars debated meanings, compared interpretations, and applied principles to political philosophy, medicine, and ethics. One of the most profound influences on Chinese divination was Taoism. The Taoist worldview emphasized flow, spontaneity, and alignment with the natural order. Divination became a way to perceive the subtle movements of the Tao, the underlying principle that governed all existence. The Tao was not a deity, but the living pulse of the universe. By observing changes in nature, reflecting on symbolic texts, and listening to intuition, Taoist practitioners learned to follow the path of least resistance, embracing harmony over force. Taoist divination sometimes involved trance states, meditation, or ritual invocation. Practitioners sought visions or intuitive impressions that revealed the deeper forces shaping events. They understood that the mind, when quieted, could perceive patterns invisible to those caught in the noise of daily concerns. Insight arose not from forceful effort, but from relaxed awareness. Confucianism, though more concerned with ethics and governance, also incorporated divinatory ideas. Confucian scholars used the I Ching extensively, seeing it as a guide to wise conduct and moral decision-making. They viewed divination not as fortune-telling, but as a form of ethical reflection. A hexagram revealed the qualities of the moment, encouraging virtuous action. In this way, divination supported the cultivation of character and the pursuit of harmony within society. The integration of divination into medicine reflected the holistic nature of Chinese thought. Practitioners of traditional medicine viewed illness as an imbalance of energy, bountifully signs, pulses, and symptoms to determine patterns of disharmony. These patterns mirrored the symbolic relationships found in divinatory text. The physician and the diviner shared a common language of observation, interpretation, and alignment with natural forces. As centuries passed and dynasties rose and fell, the Chinese approach to divination remained remarkably stable, adapted to new cultural influences, but preserved its core principles. It maintained an unbroken lineage from oracle bones to modern interpretations of the I Ching. It shaped personal decisions, philosophical discussions, medical practices, and political strategies. More than any other tradition, it revealed how divination could become a lifelong companion to human life, guiding individuals through every stage of existence. The endurance of Chinese divination demonstrated the power of a worldview grounded in harmony and observation. It encouraged people to see the world not as chaotic, but as patterned and meaningful. It taught them to navigate change with grace, to read subtle signs with patience, and to act in ways that supported balance within themselves and their communities. As the ancient world expanded its horizons, divination continued to evolve across continents. New lands, new cultures, and new ways of seeing would enrich the universal story of interpreting the unseen. In Africa, the Americas, Oceania, and countless indigenous traditions, divination would take forms as diverse as the landscapes that shaped them, revealing once again humanity's enduring desire to listen to the whispers of the world. Across the vast continents of the ancient world, countless cultures developed their own ways of listening to the unseen. In lands far from the structured courts of Mesopotamia, the temples of Egypt, the philosophical schools of Greece, and the imperial centers of China, divination emerged through intimate relationships with landscape, ancestors, and the spiritual character of the natural world. These indigenous traditions, rooted in forests, deserts, plains, mountains, islands, and oceans, reflected humanity's universal desire to understand the rhythms of life and the forces that shaped destiny. Although diverse in form and expression, they shared a deep reverence for the land and the belief that the world communicated through signs available to anyone who learned to see with clarity. In Africa, divination developed into richly layered systems that blended myth, psychology, ritual, and community guidance. Among the Yoruba people of West Africa, the Ifa tradition became one of the most sophisticated divinatory arts in the world, centered on a vast oral corpus known as the Odu Ifa, containing thousands of verses covering cosmology, ethics, healing, and destiny. A diviner, known as a Babelio, cast sacred palm nuts or a divination chain to reveal one of the 256 primary signs. Each sign opened access to specific verses that guided individuals through spiritual, emotional, and practical challenges. Ifa did not merely predict events, it revealed patterns of energy, personal tendencies, and ancestral influences. The Babelu helped clients understand how their lives aligned with cosmic forces known as Orisha. These deity-like beings represented fundamental energies such as wisdom, justice, fertility, and transformation. Divination served as a bridge between humans and these spiritual forces, helping individuals restore balance, make responsible choices, and navigate destiny with awareness. This method reflected the African emphasis on community, harmony, ancestral connection, and the moral dimensions of personal fate. Other African divinatory systems relied on different tools. In southern Africa, Sangoma healers used bone divination. The bones, gathered over generations, included animal parts, shells, and symbolic objects. When cast onto a mat, their placement revealed guidance from ancestors. Each object carried specific meanings shaped by myth and personal lineage. The pattern they formed expressed the interplay between visible and invisible realms. Bone divination was both diagnostic and spiritual, addressed health, relationships, conflict, and community well-being. The method reinforced the belief that ancestors continued to participate in the lives of the living, offering protection and wisdom. In East Africa, diviners sometimes used gourds filled with small objects that rattled when shaken. The sound, rhythm, and movement were interpreted as expressions of ancestral voices. This auditory form of divination reflected the importance of sound in African spiritual practice. Music, chanting, and drumming created bridges to the unseen world. Diviners learned to listen not only with their ears, but with an inner sensitivity that revealed subtle messages hidden within rhythm. Across the African continent, nature itself functioned as a divination text. Clouds, winds, animals, and dreams all carried meaning. A sudden appearance of a particular bird, the cry of an animal at a liminal hour, or the direction of a storm could signal spiritual shifts. These interpretations were grounded in intimate ecological knowledge and deep respect for the land. Divination was inseparable from the environment that shaped each community's way of life. Indigenous cultures throughout the Americas also developed profound divinatory traditions. Among Native American nations, visions and dreams played central roles. Vision, quest, periods of isolation, fasting, and prayer conducted in nature offered individuals the opportunity to encounter spirit guides. These guides often appeared as animals, ancestral figures, or symbolic images. The meaning of a vision unfolded gradually through discussion with elders or spiritual leaders. These visions guided personal growth, life purpose, and community service. Animals were central to divination in many Native American cultures. The behavior of buffalo, deer, eagles, or wolves revealed changes in seasons, the presence of danger, or shifts in spiritual energy. Tracks left in snow, mud, or sand were interpreted not only as physical imprints, but as messages expressing relationships between humans, the larger ecosystem. Diviners did not separate the sacred from the natural. Every movement of the natural world reflected the presence of spirit. In Mesoamerica, civilizations such as the Maya and the Aztecs developed highly structured systems of divination integrated with elaborate calendars. The Maya used a 260-day ritual calendar known as the Tzolk'in. Each day had a specific energy pattern based on combinations of numbers and glyphs. Daykeepers, trained in the symbolic meanings of these patterns, interpreted the energies governing births, rituals, and decisions. The Tzolk'in did not predict events in a deterministic way. Instead, it revealed the qualities of time itself. People learned which days supported certain actions, when to rest, and when to act boldly. The Aztecs used similar calendrical systems. They interpreted dreams, observed celestial movements, and studied unusual natural phenomena. Divination shaped political decisions, agricultural planning, and ritual activity. Sacred manuscripts, known as codices, contain symbolic images that diviners use to interpret omens. These images represented gods, cycles of time, and forces that shaped destiny. The diviner's role was to translate symbolic language into practical guidance. In the Andean regions of South America, the Inca and their predecessors believed that the world was animated by powerful spirits known as huacas. These spirits dwelled within mountains, rivers, stones, and sacred sites. Diviners known as amutas interpreted their messages through the movement of clouds across mountain peaks, the sound of water flowing through rocks, and the behavior of sacred animals. Coca leaf divination also played an important role. Diviners cast coca leaves onto cloths, interpreting the patterns they formed to reveal the intentions of spirits or ancestors. Indigenous tribes of the Amazon rainforest practiced plant-based divination using visionary rituals. Shamans consumed sacred plants that opened access to the spirit world. The visions that followed were believed to offer healing knowledge, reveal dangers, or uncover the causes of illness. These rituals extended beyond personal insight. They guided the well-being of entire communities, connecting human life to the energies of the forest. In the far north, Arctic and subarctic, peoples developed divinatory methods shaped by extreme environments. The Inuit interpreted dreams, the behavior of animals, and the shifting qualities of ice and wind. The spirits known as Turngae communicated through subtle signs. Shmoons entered trance states, using drumming and breath control, seeking guidance for hunting, weather, and community challenges. Their insight was essential in regions where survival depended on understanding patterns within harsh natural cycles. In Oceania, divination reflected the deep relationship among island peoples, the sea, and the sky. Polynesian navigators practiced one of the most extraordinary forms of divination. Reading the ocean itself, they interpreted wave patterns, star paths, bird movements, and changes in wind direction to navigate vast distances. While this knowledge was grounded in systematic training, it also involved intuitive sensitivity to subtle cues that outsiders could not easily perceive. Navigation became a spiritual art, guided by ancestral wisdom and the belief that the ocean communicated with those who listened. Other forms of divination in Oceania involved interpreting the flight of birds, the shapes of clouds, or the patterns formed by leaves in water. Some island cultures used trance rituals to receive messages from spirits connected to land or sea. These rituals emphasized harmony with ancestral energies and respect for sacred spaces. Across Australia, Aboriginal peoples practiced divination, deeply rooted into dreamtime, the spiritual foundation of existence. The dreamtime described the creation of the world by ancestral beings whose actions left spiritual imprints on the land. Diviners interpreted signs within this sacred landscape, the shape of rocks, the sound of wind moving through trees, or the appearance of animals carried meanings shaped by dreamtime stories. Dreams themselves were powerful sources of guidance. In many Aboriginal communities, dreams were believed to connect the living with ancestral forces that guided decisions, healing, and social harmony. In many indigenous traditions worldwide, the role of the diviner extended beyond prediction. The diviner was a healer, mediator, counselor, and spiritual anchor. Their work strengthened community cohesion, resolved conflicts, and ensured harmony with ancestors, spirits, and the environment. Divination was inseparable from moral and social responsibilities. It fostered balance, respect, and understanding within the community. A common feature across these cultures was the belief that divination required humility. Individuals seeking guidance approached diviners with respect, acknowledging that the unseen world possessed wisdom beyond human understanding. The diviner listened with patience, observed with clarity, and interpreted with sensitivity to the unique context of each question. Divination was not dictation from the spirits. It was a conversation, an exchange that invited reflection, responsibility, and adaptation. Many indigenous divinatory traditions emphasized personal participation. People often read their own dreams, paid attention to personal signs, and developed relationships with spirit animals or nature beings. Divination was not reserved for specialists alone. It was woven into the culture so deeply that ordinary individuals learned to interpret subtle messages in daily life. This accessibility strengthened the collective intuition of communities. These traditions also revealed a worldview in which the universe was not divided into separate realms. Nature, ancestors, spirits, and human beings existed within a single, interconnected field. Divination was the art of perceiving the movement within that field. It was an expression of relationship between people and land, between past and present, between visible and invisible. As global cultures continued to evolve, these indigenous practices influenced later systems of divination. European explorers encountered African bone casting, Native American vision quests, and Polynesian navigation, often marveling at the sophistication of these methods. Over time, aspects of indigenous divination entered global consciousness, enriching modern approaches to spirituality, psychology, and ecological awareness. Indigenous traditions revealed a truth that permeated humanity's long relationship with the unseen, that divination was not only a technique or ritual. It was a way of seeing, a way of listening, a way of living in relationship with the world. It encouraged awareness, gratitude, intuition, and connection. Through these traditions, humanity learned that the universe spoke in countless languages: wind, water, fire, animals, dreams, stars, and that every culture, in its own way, developed the capacity to understand. As the ancient world moved into new eras, divination continued to transform. It absorbed influences from empires, religions, and philosophies. It evolved into expansive systems that connected celestial movements with earthly events. In the next stage of its journey, divination would take one of its most complex and enduring forms: the rise of classical astrology, a system that sought to map the rhythms of heaven onto the unfolding of human life. As human civilizations expanded their understanding of the world, the sky gradually transformed from a mysterious canvas of lights into an intricate map of meaning. The earliest observers had watched the heavens with awe, sensing patterns, but lacking a unified framework to interpret them. Over centuries, however, ideas from Babylonian star lore, Egyptian cosmology, Greek philosophy, and later Roman synthesis merged into one of the most enduring systems of divination humanity ever created. It's classical astrology, shaped by intellectual exchange and spiritual curiosity, became a symbolic language that connected celestial rhythms with human experience. It represented a vast attempt to understand the universe as a coherent whole, where all things mirrored one another through cosmic harmony. Astrology did not emerge suddenly. It grew slowly from layers of cultural insight. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests observed the movements of planets and stars for centuries, not only to predict agricultural cycles, but to foresee political events. They believed that celestial bodies were manifestations of gods whose movements signaled divine intentions. Their omen texts recorded associations between planetary phenomena and earthly outcomes with meticulous detail. These records formed one of the earliest foundations for later astrological systems. Egypt added another layer. Egyptian priests noted the heliacal rising of Sirius, the seasonal cycles of the sun, and the relationships between constellations and agricultural rhythms. Their temples aligned with celestial points, reinforcing the belief that earth and heaven reflected each other. When Greek scholars encountered Egyptian astronomy, they absorbed its symbolic richness, blending it with their own philosophical inquiries. The intellectual fusion that ultimately produced classical astrology occurred in the late centuries of the first millennium BCE, especially within the multicultural centers of the Hellenistic world. Alexandria, with its libraries, scholars, and exchange of ideas, became the birthplace of horoscopic astrology. This system differed from earlier celestial omens. Instead of interpreting events based solely on visible signs in the sky, horoscopic astrology used the exact moment of birth to construct a map of planetary positions. This map, known as a horoscope, formed a symbolic blueprint of an individual's character, tendencies, and potential experiences. Astrologers believed that the moment of birth captured the energy pattern of the heavens, imprinting it upon the newborn. This pattern did not determine destiny absolutely, but revealed tendencies, strengths, challenges, and life themes. Astrology thus became a system of cosmic psychology, linking the movements of planets with the inner landscape of human beings. It offered individuals a way to understand their personalities, relationships, and life paths through a symbolic correspondence between microcosm and macrocosm. The philosophical foundation for this correspondence came from Greek thinkers. The idea that the universe was composed of interconnected levels, each mirroring the others, emerged from Pythagorean and Platonic thought. These philosophers believed that the cosmos was structured through harmony, number, and proportion. They saw celestial bodies as expressions of divine intelligence. Their ideas made it possible for astrology to flourish intellectually. Rather than simply listing omens, astrology became grounded in a worldview that linked celestial movements with metaphysical principles. One of the most significant contributions of the Hellenistic era was the development of the zodiac. This circle of 12 signs, each 30 degrees wide, formed the backdrop against which planetary movements were measured. The signs represented energies rather than literal constellations. Aries symbolized initiation and vitality. Taurus embodied stability and endurance. Gemini reflected communication and curiosity. Each sign offered a symbolic lens through which planetary energies expressed themselves. The zodiac became a wheel of archetypal forces that shaped the structure of astrological interpretation. Planets, too, took on symbolic meanings. In classical astrology, each planet was associated with a specific set of qualities and mythic influences. The sun symbolized identity, purpose, and vitality. The moon represented emotions, memory, and instinct. Mercury governed thought, communication, and learning. Venus expressed beauty, harmony, and attraction. Mars represented energy, desire, and conflict. Jupiter signified expansion, wisdom, and opportunity. Saturn embodied structure, discipline, and limitation. These planetary meanings drew from mythology, philosophy, and centuries of observation. They created a symbolic vocabulary that allowed astrologers to interpret the complex interplay of celestial forces. Houses formed another essential component of astrology. The birth chart was divided into 12 houses, each representing a domain of life. One house related to identity, another to finances, another to communication, home, creativity, health, partnership, transformation, travel, career, community, and inner life. The placement of planets within these houses revealed how their energies manifested in specific areas of experience. Together, signs, planets, and houses created a multi-dimensional map that astrologers use to interpret the patterns of an individual's life. Classical astrology placed great emphasis on aspects, the angular relationships between planets. When planets formed specific angles with one another, their energies combined in distinct ways. A harmonious angle could support creativity or opportunity. A challenging angle could produce tension, conflict, or transformation. These aspects were not deterministic commands. They represented patterns of potential that individuals could navigate with awareness or struggle against unconsciously. Astrology thus became a tool for self-understanding, encouraging individuals to work with their inherent tendencies rather than against them. As astrology grew in complexity, it expanded beyond personal charts. Mundane astrology interpreted celestial patterns in relation to nations, weather, or natural events. Lectional astrology determined the most auspicious times to begin important endeavors such as marriage, travel, or building. Medical astrology linked planetary energies with bodily organs and humors, guiding early physicians in diagnosis and treatment. Astrology was not confined to personal insight. It shaped collective life, politics, and even architecture. The Romans embraced astrology with enthusiasm, integrating it into both private and public spheres. Emperors consulted astrologers for political decisions. Citizens sought astrological readings for marriage, business, and travel. Although Roman authorities sometimes restricted astrologers due to fears of political manipulation, astrology continued to flourish throughout the empire. It offered a way to understand destiny within the vast, complex machinery of Roman society. Astrology's spread across the Mediterranean and Near East was facilitated by the translation of Greek astrological texts into Latin and Arabic. As the Roman Empire transformed and later declined, astrology did not disappear. Instead, it found new life in the intellectual centers of the Islamic world. Scholars in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba translated, preserved, and expanded Greek astrological knowledge. They refined mathematical calculations, developed new interpretive techniques, and integrated astrology with broader philosophical and scientific inquiry. The Islamic Golden Age produced detailed astrological treatises that influenced Europe for centuries. Scholars such as Abu Mashar, al-Biruni, al-Kindi wrote extensively on the symbolic meanings of planets, stars, and aspects. Their works blended astronomy, metaphysics, and philosophy, creating a rich foundation for the later revival of astrology in medieval Europe. The careful mathematical observations of the Islamic astronomers improved the precision of astrological calculations, while their symbolic interpretations deepened the philosophical roots of the tradition. The spread of astrology across Asia also created unique developments. As Indian astrologers absorbed Hellenistic influences, they blended them with indigenous systems of Jyotisha. This synthesis shaped Vedic astrology into a profound tradition focused not only on prediction, but on spiritual growth and karmic patterns. Similarly, Chinese astrologers blended symbolic elements from the Western zodiac with their own systems of celestial stems and earthly branches, creating hybrid approaches that enriched East Asian divination. Despite its widespread influence, astrology preserved one essential theme: the belief that human life unfolded within a cosmic web of relationships. People were not isolated individuals moving through a random world. They were participants in a universe filled with meaning. The movement of planets, the flow of time, and the cycles of nature all reflected deeper principles. Astrology offered a way to read these principles, understand their expression in personal experience, and make choices that harmonized with the greater whole. Astrology also reflected humanity's longing for connection. By linking the personal with the cosmic, it gave individuals a sense of belonging within the vastness of the universe. It reframed challenges as part of larger cycles rather than isolated misfortunes. It provided language for describing emotional and psychological patterns long before the development of modern psychology. Many astrologers viewed their work not as prediction, but as guidance, clarifying pathways, revealing tendencies, and helping individuals cultivate self-awareness. Over time, astrology diversified into countless branches. Some practitioners emphasized symbolic interpretation. Others focused on mathematical precision. Some used astrology for spiritual development, others for practical decision-making. Yet, the underlying worldview remained consistent: the belief that the universe communicated through rhythm and pattern, and that human beings could interpret these messages through careful contemplation. As classical astrology matured, it also faced questions from philosophers and skeptics. Some thinkers argued that celestial bodies could not influence human life physically. Others questioned the ethical implications of relying too heavily on predictions. Yet even these criticisms contributed to the evolution of astrology. They encouraged deeper contemplation of what divination meant. Was astrology a literal map of fate, or a symbolic mirror of the psyche? Was it a science, a philosophy, or a sacred art? These questions would shape later developments in divination. As the ancient world transitioned toward the medieval era, astrology remained central to intellectual life. It informed medicine, guided monarchs, shaped religious debates, and influenced the work of scholars across disciplines. It became a bridge between ancient ritual divination and emerging forms of mystical and scientific thought. The rise of classical astrology represented one of the most ambitious attempts in human history to understand the unseen. It created a symbolic language capable of describing the complexities of life, offering individuals a way to navigate challenges with insight and purpose. Yet, the story of divination did not end with astrology's rise. As the medieval world took shape, new forms of spiritual insight emerged in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. They blended ancient traditions with new revelations, creating systems of divination that reflected the shifting intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages. As the ancient world gave way to the intricate layers of the medieval era, divination did not fade. Instead, it transformed, adapting to new religious frameworks, intellectual developments, and cultural landscapes. The Middle Ages were not a time of spiritual silence or intellectual stagnation, as some later portrayals suggested. They were an era of synthesis where ancient knowledge was preserved, reinterpreted, and woven into emerging traditions. In both the Islamic and Christian worlds, divination evolved into new forms that blended sacred texts, mystical insight, cosmological theories, and symbolic practices. It continued to serve the same human needs it always had: the desire for guidance, meaning, and a sense of connection with the unseen. In the Islamic world, divination flourished under a rich intellectual climate, often referred to as the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars preserved and expanded the knowledge inherited from Greece, Persia, India, and earlier Near Eastern civilizations. They translated astrological texts, analyzed celestial movements, and developed complex systems of symbolic interpretation, while Islamic theology maintained strict boundaries regarding certain forms of fortune-telling, it also recognized that the cosmos operated under divine order. Many scholars believed that understanding the patterns of the heavens could reveal insights into the world's structure, provided that such knowledge was approached with humility and ethical caution. One of the most influential Islamic contributions to divination was the refinement of astrology. Scholars such as Al-Kindi, Al-Biruni, and Abu Mashar developed detailed astrological treatises that examined the movements of planets in relation to spiritual and natural laws. These thinkers saw the heavens as a grand tapestry woven by God, where each planetary motion reflected underlying truths. They did not view astrology as a means to control fate, but as a discipline that illuminated cosmic order. Their writings shaped astrological traditions from the Middle East to Europe, influencing thinkers for centuries. Islamic scholars also deepened the practice of geomancy, known as ilm al-ramel. System involved drawing lines or dots in sand or on parchment to create geometric figures. These figures, connected through patterns and symbolic associations, formed a divinatory chart. Geomancy was considered a terrestrial counterpart to astrology. Where astrology interpreted the heavens, geomancy interpreted patterns of earth. The two systems reflected the medieval belief in correspondence between macrocosm and microcosm. Geomancy provided guidance for personal decisions, political matters, and spiritual insight. Its logic was both mathematical and symbolic, blending intuitive interpretation with structured analysis. Dream interpretation held an especially important place in the Islamic world. The Islamic tradition taught that dreams could be one of the remaining channels through which divine guidance reached humanity. Scholars collected dream accounts, analyzed symbols, and produced written manuals. Among the most influential was the dream interpretation attributed to Ibn Sirin, a work that organized symbolic imagery into a comprehensive system. Dreams, featuring water, animals, celestial bodies, specific actions, carried layered meanings shaped by cultural, spiritual, and psychological factors. People believed that dreams could reveal warnings, blessings, or moral guidance. The widespread practice of interpreting dreams kept divination closely tied to personal spirituality. Mysticism, particularly Sufism, added another dimension to divination. Sufi practitioners emphasized inner vision, intuitive knowing, and states of consciousness that allowed individuals to perceive hidden truths through meditation, chanting, and deep contemplation. Sufis cultivated a sensitivity to subtle science within the world and within the heart. They believed that the divine communicated not only through external symbols, but through the inner landscape of the soul. Insight arose as a form of spiritual unveiling. Divination became less a method of predicting events and more a practice of perceiving divine guidance with clarity and sincerity. This perspective enriched the idea of kashf, or spiritual unveiling. Practitioners believed that when the heart was purified and the mind quieted, layers of reality became visible. These insights might concern personal challenges, spiritual truths, or the nature of destiny. Sufi saints were often revered for their intuitive insight, which seemed to arise effortlessly. Their guidance did not rely on formal divinatory tools, but on the clarity of inner perception cultivated through years of discipline. Their presence reflected the medieval belief that spiritual refinement sharpened intuition. The Islamic world also encountered and preserved divinatory knowledge from various cultures, as scholars translated Greek philosophical texts, Persian cosmologies, and Indian astronomical works. They integrated these ideas into their own frameworks. This intellectual openness created a unique environment where divination, astronomy, metaphysics, and theology coexisted in dynamic conversation. The result was a rich heritage of symbolic systems that shaped both Eastern and Western thought. Okay, while the Islamic world nurtured divination within a framework of cosmology and spirituality, medieval Europe inherited a different legacy. The rise of Christianity reshaped attitudes toward divination, creating tension between ancient practices and emerging religious doctrines. Early Christian leaders warned against forms of divination they viewed as attempts to bypass divine will or seek knowledge through forbidden means. Yet the desire for spiritual insight did not disappear. Instead, divination took new forms that aligned with Christian theology, while older traditions continued to influence European culture through hidden channels. One of the most significant medieval developments was the Christian reinterpretation of dreams. Unlike in earlier Near Eastern traditions, where dreams were seen as direct messages from the divine, Christian thinkers distinguished between dreams of spiritual origin and dreams arising from human desire or demonic influence. The challenge lay in discerning which dreams carried genuine guidance. Monastic writers analyzed dream symbolism, drawing from biblical stories, personal reflections, and classical writings. They recognized that dreams could contain moral lessons or spiritual warnings. This careful discernment gave rise to a rich medieval literature on dream interpretation. Astrology posed an even more complex challenge for Christian scholars. On one hand, astrology was deeply embedded in the intellectual heritage of Greece and Rome, preserved through both Islamic and European scholarship. Medieval universities taught astronomy and astrology side by side, recognizing their interconnected origins. On the other hand, theological concerns arose regarding free will and divine sovereignty. Some thinkers allowed astrology to describe tendencies, but denied that it could determine human choices. Others rejected astrology entirely. This tension led to lively debates, shaping the boundaries within which astrology could operate in medieval Europe. Despite these debates, astrology remained influential. Monarchs employed astrologers to determine auspicious times for coronations, battles, and political decisions. Physicians used medical astrology to diagnose illnesses based on planetary alignments. Many everyday people consulted almanacs that combined agriculture, lunar cycles, and astrological advice. Even church officials sometimes allowed astrological thinking to influence discussions about timekeeping, seasonal festivals, and celestial events. Astrology persisted because it offered a framework for understanding life within a structured universe. Geomancy also flourished in Europe, arriving through translations of Islamic texts, known as the art of earth divination. It became popular among scholars and lay people alike. European geomancers used charts similar to those developed in the Islamic world, interpreting symbols through an intricate system of houses and relationships. The method was valued for its balance of logic and intuition. It required skill to interpret, and it offered guidance applicable to personal, political, and spiritual concerns. Its popularity revealed the medieval desire for structured systems that connected the material world with hidden patterns. Magic and divination coexisted in medieval Europe in complex ways. Ritual magic, often influenced by ancient texts such as the Hermetic writings, attempted to summon or communicate with spiritual beings. Some forms of magic sought knowledge of the future, but others aimed to heal, protect, or purify. Manuals containing prayers, symbols, and incantations circulated widely. These texts blended Christian imagery with older, pagan, and Jewish mystical influences. Although the Church often condemned ritual magic, its survival reflected the enduring human need for direct access to spiritual forces within Jewish communities. The medieval period saw the development of Kabbalah, a mystical tradition that included symbolic methods for understanding divine intention. Kabbalists interpreted scripture through numerical patterns, symbolic associations, and contemplative practices. Gematria, the practice of interpreting words through numerical values, offered a method for uncovering hidden meanings within sacred texts. Kabbalistic teachings emphasized the interconnectedness of all things, mirroring cosmic ideas found in astrology and earlier divinatory systems. Although Kabbalah was primarily a spiritual path, its symbolic methods contributed to the broader history of divination. The medieval fascination with symbolic meaning extended to everyday life. People interpreted natural phenomena as signs. A sudden change in weather, the behavior of birds, or the appearance of certain animals at specific moments carried symbolic significance. Medieval folklore preserved interpretations of omens that had been inherited from earlier European traditions. These beliefs existed alongside Christian practices, often blending seamlessly into the cultural fabric. For many people, divination remained an intuitive and communal practice rather than a formal art. While medieval Europe experienced moments of skepticism regarding divination, it also witnessed an intense interest in understanding the hidden forces shaping the world. Scholars wrote treatises on astrological influence. Physicians analyzed bodily symptoms through humoral theory and celestial cycles. Mystics described visions that offered spiritual guidance. Monks recorded dreams that shaped their understanding of faith. Divination persisted because it addressed questions that science, theology, and philosophy could not fully resolve. It offered a way to navigate uncertainty and find meaning in the unpredictable rhythm of life. The late medieval period set the stage for a profound transformation. As Europe moved toward the Renaissance, ancient texts resurfaced, new ideas flourished, and intellectual curiosity deepened. The revival of Hermeticism, alchemy, Platonic philosophy would reshape divination once again, fusing it with fresh symbolic language and aligning it with emerging concepts of nature, spirituality, and human potential. But before those changes unfolded, the medieval world preserved a crucial truth. The divination, in all its forms, reflected humanity's search for alignment with forces greater than itself. Whether through dreams, stars, symbols, or sacred texts, people continued to listen for the quiet whispers of the unseen. As the medieval world slowly transformed into the age of rebirth and rediscovery, a profound shift occurred in the way people approached the unseen. The Renaissance did not abandon divination. Instead, it reignited ancient sources of wisdom, blended them with fresh intellectual energy, and created new, mesmerizing systems that would influence Western thought for centuries. Classical texts resurfaced, Hermetic teachings returned from obscurity, and scholars across Europe became enchanted with symbolic languages capable of revealing hidden truths. Divination entered a new era, one shaped not only by spiritual longing, but by a renewed belief in human potential, dignity, and creativity. The Renaissance drew heavily from texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, collected in the Corpus Hermeticum. These writings, which blended Greek philosophy with Egyptian symbolism, taught that the universe was alive with divine intelligence. Everything in existence mirrored the divine source. Human beings were miniature reflections of the cosmos, endowed with the ability to understand and shape reality. This worldview transformed divination from a method of predicting events into a path of spiritual awakening. To interpret symbols was to engage with the intelligence woven into the fabric of the universe. Hermeticism introduced the idea of correspondence, the principle that relationships existed between all levels of reality. Planets reflected psychological states. Elements reflected emotional qualities. Colors, metals, plants, and animals reflected cosmic forces. Divination systems built upon these correspondences offered individuals the ability to navigate existence through symbolic harmony. The Renaissance hunger for knowledge and beauty made these ideas irresistible. Scholars, artists, and magicians alike embraced the Hermetic vision of a universe filled with meaning. Astrology flourished under this renewed light, instead of being viewed merely as an omen-based practice or a tool for prediction. It became an elegant expression of universal harmony. Renaissance astrologers mapped the heavens with increasing precision using newly refined astronomical tables. They linked astrological symbolism with medicine, psychology, and philosophy. They believed that the birth chart revealed not only tendencies, but opportunities for spiritual growth. Astrology became a way of understanding the human soul through cosmic imagery. Alchemy also rose to prominence during this period. On the surface, it appeared to concern itself with the transformation of metals, the search for the philosopher's stone, and the quest to transmute lead into gold. Yet, alchemy was never solely a physical science. It was a symbolic art that mirrored inner transformation. Alchemists believed that the transformation of metals reflected the transformation of the human spirit. Their laboratories became metaphors for the soul's journey. The fire that heated the vessel symbolized spiritual purification. The union of opposites reflected the reconciliation of inner conflicts. Alchemy became a form of divination in its own right, offering insight through symbolic processes that revealed psychological and spiritual truths. During the Renaissance, one of the most influential figures in the history of divination emerged. Marsilio Ficino, philosopher, astrologer, priest, and translator. Ficino played a key role in bringing Platonic and Hermetic ideas into European intellectual life. He believed that celestial influences affected the human soul, not through mechanical forces, but through symbolic resonance. Music, colors, and fragrances could harmonize a person with the energies of the planets. Divination, therefore, became part of a broader system of natural magic aimed at restoring balance between humans and the cosmos. Natural magic differed from ritual magic in significant ways. It did not attempt to summon spirits or command supernatural forces. Instead, it sought to understand and cooperate with the subtle energies present in nature. Plants possessed healing properties because they resonated with specific planetary energies. Stones carried the qualities of earth and celestial bodies. Human emotions responded to certain colors, shapes, and sounds. Natural magic treated the universe as an interconnected whole, inviting individuals to perceive the symbolic relationships that shaped experience. Divination played an important role within natural magic, guiding practitioners toward understanding how cosmic influences manifested in daily life. At the same time, ritual magic persisted within secret circles. Texts such as the Key of Solomon, the Picatrix, and various Hermetic manuals taught methods for invoking angels, communicating with spirits, or gaining insight through symbolic visions. These practices were both feared and revered. They reflected humanity's enduring desire for direct access to unseen forces. Though the Church often condemned such practices, they circulated widely among scholars who viewed them as vehicles for spiritual mastery rather than moral danger. The Renaissance also saw the birth of one of the most famous systems of symbolic divination, the tarot. Though originally designed as a card game, the tarot's imagery was infused with medieval symbolism reflecting religious themes, social structures, and cosmic archetypes. The cards depicted rulers, hermits, magicians, fools, suns, moons, towers, and wheels of fortune. These images resonated deeply with Hermetic and alchemical concepts. Over time, scholars and mystics began interpreting the cards as more than a pastime. They saw them as a symbolic map of the human journey, from innocence to self-knowledge, from confusion to spiritual awakening. The tarot deck represented the world of archetypes, the landscape of the subconscious, and the rhythm of transformation. Each card carried symbolic layers that revealed insights into emotional, psychological, and spiritual states. The major arcana, with its sequence of 22 cards, portrayed a timeless path of growth. The minor arcana reflected daily experiences through elemental associations. The tarot did not predict fixed outcomes. Instead, it illuminated patterns, challenges, and opportunities. Its power lay in its ability to reveal the inner forces shaping outer circumstances. During the Renaissance, tarot became intertwined with alchemy, astrology, and Hermetic philosophy, forming one of the most versatile symbolic systems in the history of divination. In addition to tarot, the Renaissance expanded symbolic interpretation through a renewed interest in numerology. Ancient Greek and Hebrew number philosophies resurfaced. Scholars believed that numbers held divine significance, representing cosmic principles expressed in mathematical form. The number 1 symbolized unity. 2 represented duality. 3 reflected harmony. Number carried spiritual and philosophical resonance. Numerology offered insight into patterns of fate, personality, and spiritual purpose. It aligned closely with Pythagorean thought, reinforcing the belief that mathematics and mysticism shared a common root. The revival of ancient knowledge transformed European intellectual life. Libraries grew, schools flourished, artists created works infused with symbolic meaning, architects designed buildings aligned with celestial principles. Physicians integrated astrology with humoral theory. Scholars wrote treatises linking geometry with spiritual insight. Divination became part of a grand intellectual movement that celebrated the unity of knowledge. It embodied the Renaissance ideal that truth in all its forms was interconnected. Alongside these developments, European folk traditions flourished quietly. Village-wise, women interpreted dreams, observed weather patterns, and used herbal knowledge to guide their communities. Cunning folk cast lots, read signs in nature, and practiced protective magic grounded in ancestral lore. Pre-practices represented continuity with pre-Christian traditions passed down through generations. They preserved forms of divination that addressed the concerns of daily life, health, fertility, travel, and safety. These practices coexisted with the high intellectual pursuits of scholars, offering practical guidance rooted in local culture. As the Renaissance progressed, new scientific discoveries began reshaping the intellectual landscape. The invention of the telescope, improvements in mathematics, and the emergence of empirical observation challenged traditional cosmologies. The heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus and championed by Galileo transformed humanity's understanding of the universe. These discoveries did not immediately dismantle divination. Many early scientists were also astrologers, alchemists, or mystics. They saw no contradiction between studying the movements of planets and interpreting their symbolic meaning. Knowledge was unified in their eyes, and divination remained one thread in the tapestry of truth. However, the seeds of change had been planted. As scientific inquiry grew more rigorous and mechanical explanations replaced the symbolic interpretations, divination faced new questions. Could celestial bodies influence human affairs? Could symbolic systems reflect objective reality? Were divinatory practices expressions of human psychology rather than cosmic mechanisms? These questions would intensify in the centuries that followed, reshaping divination's place in Western culture. Yet, before those transformations unfolded, the Renaissance preserved a unique moment in history. It was a moment when divination thrived as an intellectual, artistic, and spiritual pursuit. When scholars searched ancient texts for forgotten wisdom, when artists encoded cosmic principles into their paintings, when philosophers used symbols to explore the nature of the soul, when alchemists turned laboratories into metaphysical temples, when tarot readers, astrologers, and magicians viewed the entire universe as a living book filled with messages waiting to be read. The Renaissance revealed that divination was not merely an ancient survival. It was a way of engaging with existence itself, a method for perceiving patterns that shaped human experience. It encouraged individuals to explore the depths of their own consciousness, to read the symbolic language of nature, and to seek harmony within a universe that pulsed with meaning. Even as future centuries challenged these systems, the Renaissance ensured their survival by weaving them into the cultural memory of the West. As the world moved toward the modern era, divination would face dramatic new challenges. Science would reshape understanding of nature. Rationalism would question symbolic knowledge. Industrialization would alter human relationships with land and time. Yet divination would not vanish. Instead, it would adapt once again, finding new forms that resonated with changing minds and expanding spiritual possibilities. As the Renaissance gave way to the modern world, the landscape of human understanding shifted dramatically. New discoveries, technological advancements, and intellectual revolutions altered the way people perceived the universe and their place within it. Divination, once woven seamlessly into every layer of life, found itself confronted by systems of thought that sought to explain the world through observation, measurement, and mechanical laws. Yet, even as rationalism rose, divination did not disappear. Instead, it entered a new phase of transformation. It adapted to scientific scrutiny, psychological insight, and global cultural exchange. It endured by shifting its role, no longer the arbiter of fate, but the interpreter of meaning. The first great challenge came from the scientific revolution. Thinkers like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton offered explanations of celestial motion rooted in mathematics rather than myth. The heavens became a vast mechanical system governed by physical laws rather than divine intention. This new perspective changed the symbolic landscape upon which astrology had relied for centuries. If planets followed predictable orbits, did they still influence or reflect human lives? Comets were not omens, but natural phenomena. What did their appearance signify? For many scholars, the shift was disorienting. The unity between physical and symbolic worlds seemed to fracture. Some clung tightly to astrological traditions, adapting them to new astronomical discoveries. Others dismissed symbolic interpretation entirely, bracing a worldview in which meaning emerged from rational inquiry alone. But beneath the surface of debate, divination quietly evolved. Practitioners began to see divinatory systems not as literal mechanisms, but as symbolic languages. Astrology, tarot, and numerology survived because they continued to offer insight into human experience. Even when celestial or numerical explanations shifted, the Enlightenment strengthened the emphasis on reason, logic, and empirical evidence. Philosophers argue that knowledge should be grounded in observable reality. Superstition, ritual magic, and divination were labeled remnants of an earlier age. Governments enacted laws against fortune-telling. Universities excluded astrology from academic study. Divination retreated from public life. Yet paradoxically, the very rise of rationalism created new forms of spiritual desire. People longed for meaning that lay beyond mere mechanics. They sought ways to understand emotions, relationships, dreams, and inner life areas untouched by scientific measurement. As the Enlightenment progressed, a quiet shift began. Keen interest in the mystical sciences, long suppressed, resurfaced among secret societies and esoteric groups. Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Hermetic circles preserved symbolic knowledge that had been marginalized. These groups blended Renaissance teachings with new interpretations. Divination became part of a private pursuit of wisdom. Rather than predicting events, it spoke to personal transformation, inner development, and symbolic truth. This evolution prepared the ground for one of the most significant revivals in divinatory history. In the 19th century, the Western world experienced a blossoming of spiritual curiosity. Romanticism, with its focus on emotion, imagination, and nature, challenged the rigid rationalism of the Enlightenment. People once again embraced mystery, explored dreams, myth, and intuition. Interest in the occult surged. Divination emerged from the shadows, carried into the public eye by new movements that sought to reconnect the visible world with the invisible. One of the earliest and most influential movements was spiritualism. Practitioners believed that communication with the dead was possible through mediums, seances, and trance states. Messages from spirits were interpreted as guidance for personal and moral matters. Spiritualism was not pure divination. It shared the belief that unseen realms communicated with the living. Spirit writings, table raps, and trance utterances functioned as forms of divinatory insight. The movement spread rapidly across the United States and Europe, attracting both ordinary people and prominent thinkers. Its popularity reflected a longing for comfort in a world transformed by industrialization and scientific change. Simultaneously, the study of Eastern traditions expanded dramatically. Scholars translated ancient texts from India, China, Persia, and Tibet. Western audiences encountered the I Ching, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and Buddhist scriptures for the first time. These works introduced new understandings of fate, karma, intuition, and cosmic order. Eastern divinatory systems such as the I Ching and Vedic astrology gained enthusiastic Western followers. They offered symbolic frameworks that spoke to a deeper sense of interconnectedness, countering the mechanistic worldview of Western science. Another major influence came from the birth of modern psychology. Thinkers such as Freud and Jung explored the unconscious mind, dreams, and symbolic imagery. Their work provided a bridge between ancient divinatory symbols and modern understandings of inner life. Jung, in particular, reshaped the psychological meaning of divination. He viewed symbols in astrology and tarot as expressions of archetypes, universal patterns embedded in the human psyche. For Jung, divination did not reveal external destiny. It revealed inner truth. Tarot spreads, astrological charts, and dream symbols became mirrors reflecting the subconscious. Divination took on a therapeutic role, guiding individuals towards self-awareness, integration, and emotional clarity. This psychological perspective revitalized divination for modern audiences. It offered a way to engage with symbolic systems without relying on literal interpretations. Divination became a dialogue with the unconscious, a tool for exploring personal meaning. It appealed to individuals seeking depth in a rapidly modernizing world. Tarot readers, astrologers, and intuitive practitioners found new ways to interpret ancient symbols through the lens of psychology, philosophy, and spirituality. During the 19th century, secret societies played a crucial role in divination's transformation. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in England, created one of the most influential systems of modern occultism. Its members, including writers like Arthur Edward Waite and Aleister Crowley, synthesized Kabbalah, Hermetic teachings, alchemy, astrology, and ceremonial magic into a unified framework. The Golden Dawn elevated tarot to a new level, assigning astrological, elemental, and Kabbalistic correspondences to each card. They reimagined tarot not only as a divinatory tool, but as a symbolic map of the universe and the soul. Way later collaborated with artist Pamela Coleman Smith to create the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, one of the most enduring and widely recognized tarot systems in history. Each card was rich with symbolic imagery designed to evoke intuitive responses. The deck democratized divination by making its symbolism accessible to both seasoned practitioners and curious beginners. It shaped the modern understanding of tarot, influencing countless decks that followed. Crowley, another Golden Dawn initiate, developed his own system through the Thoth Tarot deck. His work blended astrology, numerology, Egyptian mythology, and Thelemic philosophy. While controversial, Crowley's interpretations contributed significantly to 20th century esotericism, demonstrating how divination continued to evolve through personal insight and creative innovation. The 19th and early 20th centuries also witnessed the rise of divination techniques that embraced psychological symbolism rather than cosmic patterns. Scrying, for example, involved gazing into reflective surfaces such as mirrors, crystal balls, or bowls of water. Practitioners entered meditative states, allowing images to arise spontaneously. These images were interpreted as symbolic expressions of inner or external energies. The practice resembled the dream interpretation of earlier ages, but occurred in waking consciousness. Scrying crossed cultural boundaries, appearing in traditions from Europe to the Middle East, reflecting a universal human capacity for visionary insight. Pendulum divination emerged during this period as well. Practitioners used simple pendulums made of metal, crystal, or wood attached to strings. They asked questions, then interpreted the direction and motion of the pendulum as symbolic responses. This method offered immediate answers to practical concerns, appealing to individuals who sought direct guidance without complex systems. By the early 20th century, divination had become a mosaic of ancient traditions, psychological insight, and modern innovation. It adapted to new cultural climates. It embraced scientific advancements when useful and ignored them when irrelevant. It survived not because it resisted change, but because it offered something science could not: a language of meaning. The mid-20th century saw another surge in interest as countercultural movements questioned rigid social norms and explored alternative spirituality. Astrology columns in newspapers gained widespread popularity. Tarot reading spread through communities focused on self-expression, intuition, and personal empowerment. The rise of New Age spirituality brought a renewed focus on energy, consciousness, reincarnation, and holistic well-being. Divination became part of a broader movement that emphasized personal transformation rather than institutional doctrine. Eastern practices, once studied only by scholars, became part of everyday spiritual life. Yoga, meditation, feng shui, and the I Ching influenced Western understandings of energy and intuition. Divinatory practices that once belonged to specific cultures became global, accessible through books, workshops, and later the internet. This global exchange enriched divination, creating hybrid systems that blended ideas across continents. As psychology advanced, new approaches to divination emerged. Practitioners developed intuitive methods that combined symbolic interpretation with counseling techniques. Tarot readings, for example, became less about predicting events and more about exploring personal concerns, uncovering emotional patterns, and offering reflective insight. Some practitioners embraced Jungian interpretations, viewing tarot spreads as maps of the psyche. Others incorporated mindfulness, energy healing, or spiritual coaching. Divination gradually transformed into a holistic tool for self-discovery. Meanwhile, scientific skepticism continued to challenge divinatory practices. Critics argued that divination lacked empirical foundation, pointing to inconsistencies or subjective interpretations. Yet, divination persisted, not as a scientific discipline, but as a symbolic art. People sought it not for certainty, but for clarity, not for prediction, but for reflection. Divination became a companion to uncertainty, a way to navigate the emotional and psychological complexity of modern life. The late 20th century introduced a new stage in divination's evolution: the digital age. Computers enabled complex astrological calculations with unprecedented accuracy. Software programs generated detailed birth charts in seconds. Online tarot readings expanded access to symbolic insight. Discussion forums, blogs, and digital communities allowed practitioners worldwide to share interpretations and develop new methods. Divination became more collaborative, diverse, and experimental than ever before. Yet, the essence remained unchanged. Whether through a medieval astrologer studying a parchment chart, a Renaissance magician interpreting alchemical symbols, or a modern individual consulting a digital oracle, divination continued to speak to the same human desire: the desire to understand life's patterns, navigate uncertainty, and connect with forces larger than the self. As the world entered the 21st century, divination stood at the intersection of ancient memory and modern innovation. Technology, psychology, spirituality, and global exchange shaped new forms of symbolic practice. And still, beneath every method, every symbol, every ritual, lay the simple truth that had guided humanity from the beginning: that the unseen world whispered to those willing to listen. As the world stepped fully into the 21st century, divination entered a new phase of its long journey. Humanity had moved through ages defined by stone, bronze, philosophy, ritual, reason, and electricity. The digital age brought unprecedented speed, constant information, and global connection. Yet, even with these changes, people continued to seek meaning in ways strikingly similar to their ancient ancestors. The symbols evolved, the tools shifted, and the methods adapted, but the underlying impulse remained unchanged. Divination endured because it addressed questions that technology could not answer. It offered insight where logic reached its limits, comfort when life felt uncertain, and a language to speak about experiences too subtle for ordinary words. The emergence of the internet created an entirely new landscape for divinatory practice. What once required initiation, apprenticeship, or physical presence became accessible to anyone with a device and curiosity. Tarot decks that had been printed on paper for centuries found new form as digital cards that users could draw with a tap. Astrology software mapped planets with precision unimaginable to ancient observers. Online oracle systems generated readings based on complex algorithms, blending tradition with modern design. The virtual world created new methods for exploring the unseen, yet each method still echoed ancient practices. Digital divination did not replace older systems, it amplified them. Tarot readers began sharing interpretations through blogs, video platforms, and social media. Astrologers built large communities that discussed planetary movements in real time. Students of runes, I Ching, and numerology exchanged insights across continents. Practitioners, once isolated by geography, found global networks of support. The internet became a vast library of symbolic knowledge, connecting lineages that had developed independently for millennia. This new accessibility transformed divination from a specialized practice into a widespread cultural force. People from all backgrounds engaged with symbolic systems not as rigid traditions, but as flexible tools for reflection. Tarot readings supported emotional healing. Astrology offered a language for understanding personality. The I Ching guided decision-making through poetic contemplation. Divination adapted naturally to a century marked by rapid change and psychological complexity. The influence of psychology remained strong in modern divination. Jungian ideas continue to shape interpretations, especially in tarot and dream work. Many practitioners approach divination not as prediction, but as introspection. Cards, symbols, and patterns became mirrors reflecting the unconscious. Our readings became conversations that encouraged personal insight. Diviners developed techniques that blended counseling approaches with symbolic exploration. The goal shifted toward clarity rather than certainty, resilience rather than prediction. In this evolving landscape, a new form of divination emerged, intuitive guidance that blended ancient symbols with personal sensitivity. Practitioners emphasized energy, presence, and empathy. They listened for subtle impressions that arose during readings, treating intuition as a legitimate channel for insight. This intuitive approach did not rely strictly on traditional methods, but on the practitioner's ability to sense patterns beyond ordinary perception. It echoed the ancient roles of shamans, seers, and prophets, demonstrating that the human capacity for intuitive awareness had not diminished with time. Technology also introduced intriguing innovations. Algorithms designed to simulate randomness produced digital oracle readings that felt uncanny in their relevance. Artificial intelligence systems analyzed birth charts, created interpretations, and offered symbolic insights. Some practitioners embraced these tools as extensions of older practices, while others viewed them with caution. Yet, even with artificial intelligence performing astrological calculations or generating tarot spreads, the interpretive heart of divination remained human. People sought meaning in symbols, not because a machine calculated them, but because those symbols resonated with their inner world. Despite technological change, ancient forms of divination persisted in their original forms. People still cast runes carved from wood or stone. They still consulted the I Ching with yarrow stalks. They still used pendulums, scrying bowls, and handmade tarot decks. These tactile practices offered grounding in a digital era, connecting individuals with the physical world and with traditions that had survived countless ages. The blend of old and new revealed the adaptability of divination, its ability to transcend time while honoring its origins. The globalization of culture brought another transformation. For the first time in history, individuals could easily study divinatory systems from all over the world. Yoruba, Ifa, Tibetan astrology, Japanese omikuji, Maori spiritual practices, and countless other traditions became accessible across borders. This increased exchange encouraged a more respectful and informed approach to cultural traditions. Many practitioners sought to honor the origins, contexts, and lineages of the systems they studied. Divination became a way to connect with global heritage rather than a single cultural narrative. In this global conversation, a new awareness emerged that divination was not simply a collection of systems. It was a universal human expression. Every culture, no matter how distant in geography or belief, had developed ways of listening to the unseen. They used bones, shells, stars, cards, dreams, fire, water, and intuition. They sought guidance from ancestors, spirits, gods, or the deeper layers of consciousness. The diversity of methods reflected the diversity of human experience. But the shared intention revealed a fundamental truth. Humanity yearned to connect with the greater tapestry of existence. The 21st century also brought a renewed interest in mindfulness and presence. As modern life accelerated, many individuals turned to divination to cultivate stillness and reflection. Tarot spreads became part of morning rituals. Astrology helped people understand emotional cycles. Meditation practices incorporated symbols drawn from ancient systems. Divination offered a way to slow down, to step outside the rush of daily life and listen deeply. This inward turn echoed ancient forms of divination based on contemplation rather than prediction. The I Ching, for example, encouraged reflection on change rather than fortune-telling. Modern practitioners embrace this aspect, using the text as a philosophical companion. Similarly, astrology shifted from deterministic predictions to psychological insight. People used their birth charts to explore identity, relationships, and patterns of growth. Divination became a tool for inner alignment rather than external control. At the same time, divination played an important role in community building. Online groups formed around shared interest in symbolic systems. Tarot circles offered supportive spaces for practice. Astrology forums encouraged discussion about transits and life events. These communities mirrored the role of diviners in ancient cultures, who served not only as interpreters of signs, but as anchors of connection. In a fragmented world, divination helped create spaces where people felt understood and supported. The growing emphasis on mental well-being also influenced divination. Practitioners increasingly focused on empowerment, compassion, and self-reflection. They encouraged clients to view symbols as invitations rather than commands. A challenging card did not represent doom, but an opportunity to explore fears or limitations. An intense astrological transit became a moment of transformation rather than fate. This shift aligned divination with therapeutic values, grounding symbolic insight in emotional intelligence. As humanity entered an age of global uncertainty, divination provided a sense of continuity. Political upheaval, climate change, economic instability, and rapid technological transformation created collective anxiety. Divination helped individuals navigate these challenges by offering symbolic frameworks that brought coherence to complex situations. It offered ways to process emotions, understand shifting energies, and find meaning in difficult transitions. In this sense, divination served the same purpose it had in ancient times, helping people orient themselves when the world felt overwhelming. Interestingly, the scientific world, though often skeptical of divination, contributed indirectly to its modern revival. Studies in cognitive science and psychology revealed that human beings were inherently symbolic thinkers. They understood the world not only through logic, but through metaphor and narrative. Divination aligned naturally with these cognitive tendencies. It provided symbolic narratives that helped people articulate inner truths. Modern practitioners understood this and used symbolic interpretation to foster clarity, creativity, and emotional resilience. Even quantum physics, with its exploration of uncertainty, interconnection, and the role of the observer, subtly influenced contemporary discussions about divination. While many interpretations remained metaphorical, they inspired practitioners to consider how consciousness interacted with symbolic systems. Divination became less about prediction and more about participatory meaning-making, reflecting the idea that insight arose through the interaction between the individual and the symbol. As the 21st century progressed, divination experienced another evolution: integration with trauma healing, somatic therapies, and energy work. Practitioners use tarot to help clients process emotions stored in the body. Astrology informed conversations about generational patterns and inherited wounds. Rune work supported grounding practices. These integrations did not replace scientific therapy. They complemented it, offering symbolic layers of understanding that many found profoundly healing. Despite these modern developments, divination remained rooted in its ancient essence. At its heart, it was the same art practiced by early hunter-gatherers interpreting footprints, by Babylonian priests scanning the sky, by Greek oracles speaking in trance, by African diviners casting bones, and by Chinese scholars consulting the I Ching. It remained the act of listening deeply, interpreting patterns, and finding harmony with forces larger than the self. The long history of divination reveals something fundamental about humanity. People did not seek certainty. They sought meaning. They sought guidance that acknowledged the complexity of life. They sought ways to navigate the unknown with courage and humility. Divination survived, not because it predicted the future with precision, but because it offered a way to understand life through symbols that spoke to the heart. As this journey through the entire history of divination reached its final chapter, the threads from every culture, age, and practice intertwined into a single truth: that divination was the art of relationship. Relationship with the world, relationship with the unseen, relationship with one's inner self. Every symbol, omen, card, planet, dream, and pattern reflected this relational nature. Divination taught that meaning was not discovered through force, but through attentive listening. Clarity emerged not from control, but from alignment. Whether performed in a modern city, an ancient temple, a quiet forest, or a digital screen glowing in the night, divination continued to invite individuals into a deeper, more compassionate way of seeing. It reminded them that they were part of a vast, interconnected tapestry of existence. It offered comfort in uncertainty, insight in confusion, and wisdom in transition. It echoed across time, connecting countless generations through a shared desire to understand the mysteries that shaped their lives. Divination would continue to evolve, as it always had. New tools would emerge, new interpretations would flourish, and new practitioners would add their voice to the long lineage of seekers. The key, yet the essence, would remain: the quiet whisper beneath all things, inviting those who listened to notice the deeper patterns moving through their lives. And so, just as ancient fires once flickered across temple walls, casting shadows that seers interpreted as messages, the glow of modern screens illuminated a new space for divination. The human impulse remained unchanged. The world still spoke through symbols, and those willing to pause, reflect, and listen found that the unseen was never truly distant. It moved through everything, offering gentle guidance to anyone who opened their heart to hear it.